everyone to our second of 5 Saturdays. I am still trying to acclimate to working on a Saturday morning, but last Saturday, the first Saturday that we had was amazing information about self-determination. And I think today's presentation is going to be equally fantastic. So thank you to those of you who are here on time. And thank you to our CTC staff who may be joining us for the first time today. We do have some staff that are not attending every Saturday. So if this is your first Saturday, welcome. And I'm going to hand it over to Anne to do introductions so we can go ahead and get started.
All right, thank you, Jackie. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for taking time out of your weekend to tune in. I'm Anne Nygren with the District Office of Transition Services. And like Jackie said, this is the second session of the Saturday Transition Institute. So today's theme is student-centered transition planning, and we're happy that you're all here. And as you saw on the flyer, each Saturday has its own theme. They do run from 9 to noon, and then that time is divided among 3 seminars. So for today, we'll be hearing from experts in the field to learn more about student-centered transition planning. We have Nicole Douglas, Dr. Belkis Shoisel-Proslin, and Dr. Christopher Yeager. So up first is Nicole Douglas, and she is here to share about LAUSD and our goal of increasing student participation in the IEP. She is a specialist for the alternate curriculum moderate to severe instructional team, and she has expertise in adult transition. So Nicole has 30 years of experience in the field of special ed, with 22 years of that being in the classroom with students with moderate to severe disabilities, and 8 years as a specialist. Nicole assisted with the development of the adult transition programs in LAUSD and helped transition traditional special education centers to career and transition centers, the CTCs. So before I hand it over, like Jackie said, this is being recorded and it will eventually be available on MyPLN. Closed captioning is enabled, so go ahead and click the CC button if you're interested in that. And should you have any questions, please ask using the Q&A. And so that you can plan accordingly, we won't be taking official breaks, but there will be a short pause after Nicole that gives me time to introduce the next presenter and give that presenter time to share their screen. And we'll do the same after the second. In the chat box, I will put the resources organizer. That document shares each of the presenters' slide decks, their contact information, and all of the resources that they would like to share with you. So that one document will include all 3 of the presenters' information. And also included in there is our feedback survey, which if you can take a few minutes to complete that, that's really helpful to us. And last, thanks again for being here. Your attendance means a lot, and we look forward to learning together. And I will hand it over to Nicole Douglas.
Thank you, Anne. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and pop up my presentation. Okay. Is everyone able to see my screen? Okay.
Yeah, it looks
all
good.
Right. So perfect. Okay. So good morning, everyone, and welcome. My name is Nicole Douglas, and our focus today will be on increasing student participation in the IEP process. The information that I will share with you this morning will offer some key components that will support teachers and our admin with meeting the expectation of our district to increase student participation in the IEP process, as well as increasing participation for our students in those IEP meetings. So today we will take a look at the current state of our district in terms of students participating and have a little discussion to determine why it is important, why this is an important practice that supports the development of lifelong skills for students with IEPs. So I will also share some potential outcomes and some strategies that will help to increase participation in the IEP process. Then we will have a resources walkthrough. We have a lot of resources that we want to share that will help support. And then we'll talk a little bit about where we can start the process. We'll recap some of the key points of the presentation and then talk about next steps. So before we jump right in, I want to humor everybody a little bit this morning. David and I, my colleague, prepared a short little script, but the script entails a message. So I'm going to go ahead and hit this play button and we'll see if you receive the message.
Hey, David. Hey, that was a great birthday party for James on yesterday, right?
It sure was. I mean, there were so many gifts and balloons and that cake. That cake was delicious.
Yes, the cake was beautiful. Hey, I have a question for you. I really enjoyed the party, but where was James?
James? James wasn't invited.
He wasn't invited? What do you mean he wasn't invited? How could he not be invited? The party was for him.
We just didn't think it was necessary for him to be there. I mean, you saw we had a wonderful time without him, right?
I'm sure he would have had a wonderful time too if he had only been invited.
So I kind of humor myself a little bit because I was so hurt that James was not invited to his own birthday party. But preparing for and hosting a birthday party is kind of similar to that of preparing for and hosting an IEP meeting. So similar to birthday parties, IEP meetings can be viewed as yearly gatherings where groups of people get together to celebrate one's individual accomplishments, their growths, and their milestones. Now, imagine having a birthday party being held in your honor and you're not there, and we're not invited. You would be missing out on an event that celebrates you, that gives you the opportunity to shine. When we do not provide that opportunity for our students to participate in the IEP process, we take away their opportunities for praise, for growth, and we push them further away from reaching their milestones. And that milestone is independence. So the message that we would like for you to take with you today is invite our students to the party, y'all. The party being their IEP, because after all, they are the I in IEP. So the data that you see on your screen is our current data from our district. The data refers to student signatures received district-wide during the IEP meetings. So before I actually go into the numbers on your screen, I just want to share this important point that currently we have approximately 61,000 students in LAUSD with active IEPs. So during the 2021 school year, we received 3,868 students' signatures. These were digital signatures, meaning that students were present and they, in some way, participated in their IEP. So we know that this was particularly a difficult year in more ways than one due to COVID, but during the 21-22 school year, there was an increase in student signatures to the tune of an additional 5,821 students. These students experienced some level of participation based on the digital signature data. So presently, our goal for the 22-23 school year and beyond is to increase student participation in the IEP process and IEP meeting attendance by 30%. So essentially, we are aiming for about 1/5 or 20% of all students with disabilities to participate in that process. So we understand, and the expectation is not that every student would be able to sign their IEP digitally, but we want to consider some of those assistive or adaptive means to accomplish this for our students. The goal isn't 100% participation, but it is to increase the participation by 30% this year and to continue to see that growth in participation in years to come. So let's look at IDEA and how it establishes the connection to student participation. Under IDEA, the primary vehicle for providing a free and appropriate education is through an appropriately developed IEP that is based on the student's needs. IDEA 2004 provides guidance on the practice of providing those opportunities to increase the student engagement in the process. The involvement of students and parents, along with general and education and special educators in the IEP planning process, kind of gives us that guide of all of the parties or the partners that should be involved in planning and writing an IEP. Then it focuses on student attendance in the IEP meetings, especially if post-secondary goals and transition will be the discussion of the conversation. And then lastly, it states that transition services should be based on students' strengths, preferences, and their interests. So IEP goals, objectives, hopes, and dreams should all be centered around student strengths, preferences, and interests. So how can we as educators determine this, let alone develop a purposeful, meaningful IEP without the input of the student? And how does this happen when the student is not in attendance or even invited to their own IEP meeting? So there has been these conducted around student participation in the IEP process, even as early as elementary school. The research from Special Education Elementary Longitudinal Study, it shows that less than 50% of students that are aged 7 to 12 actually attend their IEP meeting. It also states in another research that over half of transition age students with ID or ASD, they did not attend their IEP meeting at all, or if they did, they participated very little. But the findings and the overall for this is that students who participate, they have better academic and transition outcomes, and along with both better post-secondary employment outcomes and a higher quality of life and greater independence, which is the goal for our students and why this is the work that we do. So now I'm going to share just a few potential student outcomes for participation in IEP meetings. So students that attend and take an active role in the IEP meeting and the process, they're more likely to know about their eligibility and become more familiar with the IEP process. Through this, they begin to be able to discuss their IEP strengths, their needs, goals, and objectives. They are able to provide input and assist in setting some of those goals and objectives based on their abilities, their wants, their needs, and their interests. as they become more comfortable and become more familiar, they begin to take on a leadership role. In the IEP meeting, they begin to introduce the participants. They shake hands, they open the meeting, present information about themselves, all during the IEP meeting. And then they are able to make the decision to either consent or not consent to the information in their IEPs. So now we'll have a little time to share some of our thoughts around some of the information that I've shared so far. So the question is, what can IEP participation for your students look like? And please feel free to share examples in the chat. Okay, Anne, are you monitoring the chat for me?
I am. So there's some great examples in there right now. Yvette wins the award for being the first to respond. She said, do you want me to read them out?
Yes, please.
Share their transition goals. Another person said, share an about me PowerPoint. Someone agreed that we do need more involvement of students. We have self-led IEPs, inviting participants to the meeting and leading the agenda. Student-led IEPs, all that you mentioned are used. Also, the student can say how they feel they have improved. Answering questions, sharing strengths and challenges, stating their strengths and areas of need, developing
Nice.
a person-centered plan and having students share that during the IEP, making PowerPoint presentations, having the students do that, having students give input on their goals, reading off the slides in a slideshow presentation, doing the introductions and reviewing goals. They can talk about what supports are helpful to them. Stop me, there's like quite a few.
Okay, but all of the, I was enjoying all of the answers, and every last one of them are correct. These are all ways that we can have our students participate a little more in that IEP process. Thank you for sharing. Thank you, Anne, for monitoring for me. So next I have a short video clip. I actually like the video in its entirety because it shares what it may look like from a student perspective and as a family perspective as well, because we do have a few parents that do speak in this video. But the video in its entirety can be found on the I'm Determined website, but I'm just going to play a short clip of it for you.
Grandma helps me with it.
In the past, it's just been the parent and the school system sitting down and banging out what we want for him, what we think he should have to do, what we think his needs are. Now you're getting how he feels, what he wants.
My favorite class is Mrs. Wright's.
A lot of times they feel like they're out on the outside looking in, and I think that this is pretty important to let them feel, for them to take control back of their own life and existence and what's happening with them.
Do you remember going to IEP meetings when you never talked at all?
Yeah.
What was that like?
Boring. I wouldn't have much to say. I just wouldn't talk. I was just there to listen.
Why do you think it's important for you to do some of the talking?
because my parents don't know me like they think they do. I like just to keep some things to myself, school and all that. I think all kids try to do that, try to hide stuff from their parents and everybody else.
Which kind of IEP is better? The one where you sat there and didn't say anything, or now when you do your presentation?
Now,
Why is now better?
because I get to read it to everybody.
What does that make you feel like?
A big and strong boy.
The students understand what accommodations are and how it will affect them, particularly when they understand that it leads to a diploma or a type of diploma. So I really think that they're going to have a stronger voice, and I look forward to these students getting to high school and leading their IEP meetings.
She and I have worked on this for about the last 3 weeks, and she's written this portion of her IEP. So Heather, I'm going to let you go first.
Okay. My name is Heather Good, and I am 18 years old and in 11th grade at Turner Ashby High School. I have been receiving special education service since I was in 2nd grade. I need special education service because I get my words and numbers backwards.
Why do you think it's important for you to talk during your IEP?
Because I have more say-so, and I can tell people what I'm doing and how it affects me and stuff.
Have you been to IEP meetings where you didn't say anything?
Yes, I am.
What was it like?
I just sit there and let my mother talk to them. I mean, you understand some of it, but then it's not like you don't get any benefits out of it from not saying anything.
I think it is a much more honest IEP. I think it's just represents the kids so much more. I mean, you can get an IEP full of testing scores and reports from different tests or different teachers, and those are helpful, but they don't really explain what a kid's like.
At IEP meetings where I did not participate, it was like I was thinking, why am I even here? Because I don't get to say so anything that goes on, so why am I here? My name is Heather Faulkner, and I want to present a purpose story. My name is Heather Faulkner, my middle name. I'm 2 years old, and I'm a 12th grader at Turner Ashby High School. I will be graduating this year. I have passed all my SOLs that are required for a standard diploma as of the end of 11th grade.
She started doing her own IEPs started that process in 9th grade. I got her as a 10th grader, and I think really being involved in that and understanding her disability and understanding that it is social and behavioral, and I think she's been able to translate that and take some control over that in her life. That's been a big it's been a big positive thing for her as well, and she hasn't had a lot of positive experiences in school. Hi, Nicole, would you give us some words about your plans for the future and your current academic performance?
I have completed requirements for a standard diploma from Turner Ashby High School. I currently have my license, but do not have a vehicle at this time.
It changes the focus. It's not paperwork all of a sudden. It's real. It's what's happening to help these kids become more successful at school.
Very powerful video because it captures the perspective from students in elementary, middle school, high school, and as you saw, adult transition. Okay, so now let's talk about the strategies that will help to increase student participation. So there are many ways to include students in their individualized education program meetings, and every student is different. So I'm going to share a few essential tips to remember when encouraging student participation in the IEP meetings. So when you think, what are some things that I can do to encourage participation? I want you to think about a drink. It's a drink that we all loved as children and when we were growing up. It's called the High C, except this strategy is spelled differently, and it will help you to think and remember of ways to engage students in their learning as well as increase that participation. So the first is H for help. So we want to help the students to become familiar with their disability and their IEP. So we have to create dialogue. We have to speak openly with our students about their disability, their classification, and their learning needs. Engage students in that dialogue around the IEP, familiarizing them with what the IEP actually is. Talk about their accommodations and modifications and all of the supports that they may need to increase their learning. So we also want to explain to our students what services they should be receiving and what those services are meant to provide. So the next is I for integrate. So we slowly integrate the student into the IEP meetings. For example, a student can participate for 10 minutes for the first meeting, and then subsequent meetings, you just increase the participation, the minutes, as we go along from year to year as they become more comfortable. So for the younger students or students that are just beginning the journey in the IEP process, a straightforward way to bring students into that conversation is to have them introduce people in the room. They can introduce their family members. They can explain their relationship to staff. For students who may be a little hesitant to begin actively participating in their meetings, making an introduction offers a way to start to contribute and increase their comfort level in sharing their voice in a meeting. For students who may not be able to verbalize these introductions, speaking could be substituted using an augmentative and alternate communication device. They could also identify the individuals being introduced by gesturing. So for example, as the case manager lists the individual present in the room, the student can point out or nod toward them as an adaptation of a verbal introduction. C for choose. We want to encourage participation by choosing a section of the IEP and have your student prepare something to add, such as their interests, their strengths, or their preferences. So remember that the IEP isn't just about academics. Including a student's extracurricular interests is one great way to get the students involved. Sharing some of their best work or a portfolio also helps to increase. Students love to talk about them. So, but during the meetings, teachers, they typically take the lead and share on behalf of the student. But to gain a student-centered focus, students can share their own classroom assignments, their own portfolio, and activities that highlight their skills. So for students attending their first IEP meeting, they may find one single task, explain it, and discuss why they felt they were successful in the task completion. So students who feel more comfortable can assemble a slide presentation or showcase elements of a portfolio of their work throughout the year. And then lastly, we have E for engage. Engage students in the activities that will assist with developing the IEP goals or developing the piece of information that you want students to share at their IEP. So we want to encourage our students to set their own academic or post-secondary goals. Engage students in that dialogue to front load specific vocabulary, use writing activities such as sentence starters or graphic organizers. And all of this helps to engage the student, but it also helps them to kind of organize their thoughts in preparation for sharing. So everyone can participate. So even students with more extensive support needs, cognitive and communication deficits can also participate. Most time, it's just all about implementing those communication strategies that we already have in place. So With this, I would like to share the participation matrix. This can be used as a guide to help increase student participation in the process. And this document can also be found in the resources, the Student IEP Participation Resource folder that we have shared with you. So speaking of that resource folder, if you would like to take a moment to actually open up the folder, you can either use the link provided or access by using the QR code, just so that we can kind of peruse through some of the resources. We have resources in the folder for elementary, middle school, high school, and adult transition. But all of the resources that we compiled for you will find them helpful, and helpful in helping our students to not only learn about the IEP process, but to also gather their thoughts and increase that participation. So we'll give a couple of moments to look through the resources really quickly, and then we'll share a few scenarios with you. Okay, I'll give one more minute to kind of peruse through, and then we're going to jump into our first scenario. Okay, our first scenario is about John. John is a middle school student who is non-ambulatory and has limited use of his arms and hands. So for John, what level of participation would you expect for John to have? So when looking at John, we want to think about using those UDL strategies. So the use of digital materials may be beneficial. Some speech-to-text apps, offer choices for how John can demonstrate his knowledge. We may also want to consider using some software supports or low or high-tech devices to help John communicate or share his thoughts during the IEP meeting. And some of the suggested pre-writing activities could be the student IEP or the script, which is located in the resources folder, or the label yourself worksheet that can also help John to begin to organize some thoughts. Okay, now we have scenario number 2, Kathy. Kathy is a student that does not use spoken language, receiving LAS services at her high school. What level of participation would you expect for Kathy to have? So again, thinking about those UDL strategies, Kathy could actually use pictures and photos to share her thoughts. Kathy could also create a video, the use of ASL, And then again, those low-tech or high-tech devices come in handy when students are trying to express themselves and their thoughts. So some of the suggested pre-writing activities could be the I'm Determined one-pager. Kathy could fill that out with some of the goals and objectives that she may want to accomplish in the future. And then we have the All About Me web, which is a graphic organizer that helps to organize the thoughts. So now we have scenario 3 with Eric, who participates in the work-based learning program at his CTC. So what level of participation would you expect for Eric to have? So for Eric, we would want to begin with some of those suggested pre-write activities. There's a pre-writing activity in the resource folder labeled Hopes and Dreams. This is where students document all of the hopes that they have for themselves and some of the things that they may want to do moving forward after they leave us. The I'm Determined goal plan is a plan that helps to jot down some of the goals that the students want to accomplish. We also recommend completing some of those transition-based assessments because those assessments yield a lot of helpful information. We also have in the resource folder a This Is Me PowerPoint template. Like somebody pointed out in our chat earlier, that students can put together a PowerPoint that shares all about themselves. A lot of the times this is done for our CAT students, and I've had the opportunity to sit in on some of those IEPs, and they are very powerful. Very powerful. They really help you to understand that our students do have goals. They do have things that they want to accomplish, and we want to help them to continue to self-advocate for themselves, and we want to push them in the direction that they may want to go. So, and then lastly, providing opportunities for role play. So the role play actually is used to help the students become more comfortable with expressing themselves in groups or in front of people. Sometimes we as adults need role play before we do our presentations. Some of us still get nervous, even though we've done presentations for years and years and years. We still get nervous when it's time to present in front of other people. So definitely the opportunity to practice through role play is very beneficial. So you may think, where can I start? A good place to start with our students is the individual transition plan, the ITP. So again, we want to engage students in that dialogue about their plans after they leave us. Complete transition assessments to gather some of those strengths, those preferences, the interests and needs. We want to also encourage the input from our students when developing those post-secondary goals. We want to encourage them to share the ITP at the meeting, and maybe even during the meeting, consider sharing the ITP at the beginning, especially if transition is going to be the focus. There are many opportunities for practice. The additional opportunities, you can embed some of this practice into your ELA or your ELD instructional activities. They work well with career exploration activities. They can be practiced during homeroom or advisory periods, and certainly through those transition-based instructional activities. So just a little food for thought. When thinking about your students, what levels of participation might you expect to see Given all of the information that you've been given in regards to increasing student participation, what level might you expect to see moving forward? And then what strategies and resources will you use or share with the IEP teams? So that is just food for thought. We want you to continue to kick that thought around. And then some of the things with your students. So, okay, just to recap, student participation in the IEP process. So we now know that our goal for LAUSD is to increase student participation in IEP meetings by 30%. We also know that students that participate in the IEP process have better academic and transition outcomes. We've learned that students who participate develop self-determination and self-advocacy skills when participating in their IEP meetings. And students develop a greater sense of the ITP and their needs around education, training, employment, and independent living. So now for our next steps, what can I do on Monday? We can review and share the resources. And I know this may be a challenge, but we have to begin to talk with our parents about the importance of students participating in the IEP meetings and in the process of developing their IEPs. We know that that is a hurdle. Some parents are very hesitant to allow their student to participate, but it's for the embetterment of the students. It's increasing the independence in that student. It's helping them to self-advocate. It's helping them to be a part of the decision-making process for something that's centered all around them. So on Monday, you can also plan for students to practice the skills that will help them to be able to participate in their IEP meetings. We can create a dialogue with your colleagues of what this can look like at your school site. And then you can select 1 or 2 students. We understand this is a process. So just selecting 1 or 2 students to begin that process, to begin implementing the High-C strategies will push you further along in supporting our students in participating in their IEPs. So I don't know if you knew, but you have a student participation support team available to assist you if you need additional support, additional resources in helping our students to increase that participation. You have myself, I am the specialist for formerly Local District Central, Local District East and South. We have David Montalvo, who is the specialist for the North and the West. And then we also have our other members of our team, Dr. James Kuntz, coordinator of moderate severe instruction, and Tiffany Sepe, the specialist for K-12 alternate curriculum. We are here to answer any additional questions that you may offer, any additional support that you may need. So that is all for me. Thank you so much for allowing me to share. And Anne, I'm gonna turn it back over to you and Jackie.
Great, thank you. And I did see in the chat, there was someone that had posted a question and then you did touch on it, but maybe you could hone in on if there are any specific resources. But a teacher was wondering if parents are resistant to the process. Are there any specific resources? Or I was thinking about some of the training, parent trainings that I've heard about. Maybe you could share with all of us some extra support around those parents that are resistant to this process.
Yes, we do encounter some parents. Don't get me wrong, some parents are very open, but then we do have others that are very hesitant. And I think the first step is beginning that dialogue and getting the parent a little more comfortable of the thought of the student participating. Some may not feel comfortable with their students even knowing that they have a disability. And these are very hard conversations for our parents, but we have to kind of massage, we have to begin the dialogue somewhere. Because it just supports the student and becoming self-determined and being a self-advocate. So we do offer parent trainings around self-determination, self-advocacy. So we actually have a parent training series that is coming up. March 29th will be our first session in that series. This is in collaboration with the State Council on Developmental Disabilities, and it's all around supported decision-making. So I believe that Jackie, you may have a flyer to share. So
I do. And so first of all, I'll just stop and say thank you so much, Nicole, for this amazing presentation. When we put together the Saturday Transition Institutes, I will say we, but Anne gets all the credit. Anne looked around for the experts in our field and found you right here in LA Unified to really talk about best practices, and the impact on students, as well as being able to embed it for our staff and what this actually looks like in LA Unified. So I just want to say, out of all of the Transition Institute's 5 sessions, I think you're the only LA Unified presenter that we have, and that really speaks to how knowledgeable you are in this area. So thank you for that. So yes, we do have information on parent trainings that are coming up. There's a series of 3 trainings. They are in the evenings, which is great for parents, but which does mean that our DOT staff will primarily not be able to participate, because you guys can participate and volunteer, but for the most part, they're evening trainings. So we can't sponsor everyone to attend. We do have some DOT staff who are doing upcoming presentations on conservatorship who are attending, but we will be sending that out on Monday. So James shared it with me a couple of days ago, but we're going to wait till Monday to send it out. So yes, those parent trainings I think would be great. So DOT staff will be posting it on our Schoology group on Monday, and you can share out with parents. And I think that question about parents and sort of their reluctance to have their students attend is a really significant barrier that we face. It's a change of culture, and I'm not talking about people's cultural backgrounds, but a change of culture in terms of our expectations for student participation, and we know that takes a long time. So I think considering the strategy of inviting students for part of the meeting, they don't have to attend the IEP culture. That's right, Marco. They don't have to attend the entire meeting, but they could participate for part of the meeting. And so I think I also wanted to just point out that the majority of us on this training today support students with disabilities who are in high school or older, right? So this training is meant to encompass all students, but this group of people primarily support students in high school or older at the CTCs. And so once a student is 18, they can obviously choose themselves whether to participate if they're not conserved. But before the age of 18, and while students are in high school, I think it is a great opportunity to start talking to the parents about the fact that in a few years, their students will hopefully be attending some type of post-secondary education institution. And in most cases, those institutions are reaching out directly to the to the students, and not at all reaching out to the parents. So the parents don't have access to their students' grades, can't set up meetings for them, can only attend if their student tells them about it. So the whole concept of self-determination that we discussed last week, they kind of go hand in hand with this IEP participation practice because we really want to empower our students to be successful independently. And they may still need supports, but there is going to come a time in most of their lives where they have to navigate a lot of these systems on their own. So I'm just trying to tie the two sessions together. So Nicole, I am seeing great feedback in the chat, and I'm sure we'll have just as positive feedback in our survey. So I think now's a chance maybe to repost today's resources again. So we can have that in the chat for you. And again, look for Schoology. Thanks, Anne. Look for a Schoology announcement on Monday about parent trainings that you can share with your parents. And any last questions before we take a couple-minute break?
And while the questions are coming in, I was going to echo all of that too. Thank you so much, Nicole. It was really great. I loved that video, and I loved that student. I actually wrote down her quote, that student Heather that said, "Why am I here?" And it was like, I've always felt like there's times in an IEP meeting and you look around and sometimes there's even parents that are there that I feel like are wondering, like, why am I here? And so I loved that she admitted that in that video, and it was neat to see that that case carrier saw that opportunity with her and included her, and it just proved to be a much more meaningful experience for her. So I loved all the strategies you gave us. I love that you gave us some things to think about for Monday. And yeah, the chat is just blowing up saying thank you and complimenting you on your presentation style and it being concise and practical and things that they can incorporate into what they're doing. So thank you so much for sharing that. I did put in the chat the resources organizer. And if I'm not seeing any questions, but I think we did finish up a tad early. I am waiting to hear a thumbs up from Belkis if she is up for starting a few minutes early. So we will give Belkis a chance to pull up her screen, and then I will do the introduction for Belkis. And just one last thank you to you, Nicole. Thanks for
thank you guys so much
sharing your expertise.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And I really do hope that everything that was shared was helpful. But thank you. Have a wonderful weekend, everybody.
Thanks, Nicole. Yes, it was very helpful. And so, yes, let us do a 4-minute break here, 9:56. So everyone gets a chance to get up, stretch, get your coffee, whatever you need to do in the next 4 minutes. And we will start the next session just a few minutes early. Thanks, everyone.
Hi, Belkis. Good to see you.
You too. How are you?
Good. And I hope everyone had a minute to just do what you needed to do here before we expand on our student-centered focus for today, and thinking about our student-centered transition planning. So some of you might recognize our next presenter. She has been part of our assessment series that we've done within the District Office of Transition Services. If you have not met Belkis, she is definitely an expert, and we're happy that she's with us today. So I will quickly introduce her and then pass it over to her. So this is Dr. Belkis Choiseul-Proslin. She is an assistant professor and a director of the Center for Teacher Development at the University of Pacific in Stockton. Before that, she was a special ed high school teacher and a transition coordinator in Washington, D.C. Her areas of expertise and research are in special education transition and teacher preparation. So she is perfect for this task that I asked her to help out with. She always provides really, one, they're cute, and two, they're filled with really great content and resources for presentations. So I will hand it over to you, Belkis, and thank you all for staying with us and being here today.
Thank you, Anne. Hi, everyone. I am just so happy to continue the conversation today from the first presentation. And traditionally, when I would talk about student involvement, I'd cover so many of those intro and like, we need to know this information concepts and topics that were covered in the first half or in the first part of today. And it was such a good challenge to be like, what else do I share now? Because I think I've become so used to doing like 101. Now we're going to go into like 201 or 202, whichever one goes next. And it's just a little bit more of what we're going to look at actually is just a quick review of those whys, those really great reasons why we do or why we want to do more student involvement in transition. And then as we go along, we'll look more into preparing students for doing this. There's a lot of really great strategies. I am kind of a proponent that a lot of these things begin with conversations, but sometimes knowing how to have those conversations is a little bit difficult. And along the way, I'll share resources with you all of things that have helped me, but things that I know generally are useful and helpful to many teachers kind of going through this process or trying to enhance their skills in this process. So in my review of whys, it's not that I don't think you know those things, especially after joining today. It's far more about how we share the whys to others, to students, but also to anyone else in the IEP team for whom this is like still a foreign concept, and we need to maybe do some convincing and we need to talk to them a little bit better. And so one of the first questions, like, is it going to make any kind of difference? For students, it makes a huge difference. We don't see those things right away. We're not going to see them from the first time that they participated in a meeting to tomorrow. But it makes a difference over time. Consistency is like thing that needs to happen. We know this as like human beings. Consistency makes progress, and so we keep consistently involving our students and having them be involved as much as they're able to, and sometimes willing to. But over time, that those skills develop into greater things. So for students overall, we know it leads to better outcomes in life, primarily because they are taking ownership of their future. They're displaying these personal autonomy thoughts and skills, and they're building those things up. Our ability to be like functioning human adults is dependent on these skills. They're like muscles that you have to build up in order to like stand strong and have good posture and all of these wonderful things. And the same thing kind of goes for these concepts in transition. We need, as youth, we need to be able to build up these really good skills so that one day when I'm an adult and I don't have my teachers and I don't have my parents with me all the time, I can make decisions about myself. I can seek the help that I need. I can help others when needed, and interact in the world in like positive and like good ways that help me feel like a better person. Those are muscles that need to be built up. Our responsibility as educators, among all the other responsibilities we have, is to help build these things. We do so much of that in our everyday interactions with students, But we also know that students with disabilities don't get as much time and preparation and support for these areas. And so that's where we come in, because we will fill in these gaps for them or help fill in the gaps. One of the bigger things that I think is a benefit of, or what difference it makes for student involvement, is a student's ability to understand their own disability or students' understanding of their disability. And this all goes along with their self-determination skills and the growth of their social skills. But there's something about that disability awareness that is a huge missing piece once students leave the high school setting. Like studies have shown that once students leave, they think the disability is gone, and it may not affect them in the same way that it's affecting them when they're in school for 8 hours, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't have an effect, and it doesn't mean that they're not entitled or have the ability to access accommodations and resources that will make any other future setting more accessible to them, even if it's just like an audio recording of the employee handbook at their new job. They didn't even know that that was an option that they could ask for, and it would really help them prepare for the job and be better at the job. And who reads the employee handbook? I don't know, that was a weird example, but things like that. The disability awareness part, I think, needs to grow so much more with a lot of students, and involving them in this process is having them talk about what they're really good at and what they need help with and how they will find those support systems. An IEP meeting that involves students actually helps to lead far more prioritization of the student in that meeting, meaning that it'll come up in a bit, but there's a perspective change where it's not me and the math teacher who I've never gotten along with, and now we got to be at this meeting and he doesn't like my kid, and my kid gets really anxious and then he's going to burst out. And like, we know what these meetings feel like. And we know that they are never productive to anybody. And we know that this sometimes for a little while of my life, I was like the queen of the 15-minute IEP. I highly do not recommend doing that, but in the moment, I was like, this is great. We're not going to waste any time. But I also don't have anybody else's opinion in there, not the student, not the family. And this re-centralization, putting the student in the middle, making sure that they're at the center of all of this discussion and part of the discussion as much as they're able to be, helps make for better collaboration. It really helps everyone else understand what we're there for. And again, prioritizes that student. So it does benefit everyone. And I also think a side note that nobody really tells other teachers, it's a showcase of not just your student skills, your skills as an educator. It is far more impressive to sit at a meeting where you have a student who maybe not everyone in that IEP team knew very well, come up and speak and talk about their interests and their preferences and what they want to do with their lives and how they are working towards this thing, and they're seeking feedback and all of these wonderful things. And when we don't see that happening is when we don't prioritize that student as being in the middle, and not just in the middle, a voice in the middle. Typically what happens, or what we know what happens in traditional IEP and transition planning parts of the IEP meeting, is that the teacher's talking the most. And this is not necessarily unexpected. We expect the teacher to talk a fair amount. You are there with your students. You did the assessments with them. You're helping them all the time. We totally understand that. But we also, at a typical IEP meeting, the student is talking 4% of the time. That's a little one up there compared to everyone else who is typically there. 4% of the time for a meeting that is all about you. And as we know in transition, you're getting older. This is the meeting will take a turn at some point about planning for your future life. And if we're not having students talk throughout any of that part, then I've planned really great things for your life. I have no idea if you're going to follow through on a single one of those because I've planned those things out, not you. Or you haven't talked to us about it, or even if you did, nobody else knows that this is what you want. So it just sounds like words being said. So what happens when a student takes lead? Actually, I should have maybe done this a little bit differently now that I think about it. What happens when a student takes lead? On the left side of this, we see that at a teacher-directed meeting, participation for students is so low. So the student introduced themselves only 4% of the time. I need you to think about that. The student introduced themselves at their own meeting, that thing that's about them, where they're about to talk about the rest of the year and what they want to do with their future, only 4% of the time, even though everybody knows that they're there for that meeting, but they had no like initial hi, thank you for joining me at my meeting. They didn't introduce, or they will very rarely introduce other IEP team members. And this is a really easy and quick practice for a student to say, like, here's my mom is here to help me with this, my teacher is here to help me with this, my school psych is here to help me with this. And that very rarely happens. And 0% of the time does it happen where a student will state their purpose, the purpose of the meeting. And you may be familiar with the conversation of what's an IEP that you've had with a student in the past. We don't tend to use that word with them for some reason, or not many do. Or if they do, they know that they have to go to this meeting, but they don't know why. And this is just something that doesn't really make a difference for the students. We need the student to take ownership of these things. Not everything will be all at once, but when a student does direct their own meeting is when we're looking at the right side of this table here, those numbers jump. They just increase exponentially. They go from the student introducing themselves and they're talking about the reason that they're there. And then even at the other areas here, they're expressing their interest so much more. They're talking about their skills and limitations. They're talking about, like, they're sharing their opinions and their goals. All of us who work with teenagers know very much they don't share those things very easily with us. With many adults, right? They have to be with very trusted people. And even if you are a trusted person to this team or to these students, not everyone in that IEP meeting is a trusted person to that student. And so they will be like, all of a sudden, although you guys have talked about it for so long and you've got the goals and you've worked on it and you know what the student wants, if they are not kind of on board with the whole process, they don't know why everybody in that team is there, what the purpose of them being there is, they are far less likely to want to share those things unless to like coax it out of them completely. And so we know that when we have students directing parts of their IEP or even the whole IEP when possible, and the transition plan as well, we are able to see just huge jumps in their like self-expression and opinions and like taking a lot more ownership. It's really, really wonderful to see that, but this is a huge shift that needs to happen. And so what we're going to look at is before the meeting, working with students to help create or prepare them for this. And then I'll also make sure to go over a little bit quicker because I want to focus more on the students, how to move this shift to other members of the IEP team. So for students, I think the process, I mean, you have to introduce the process first. The process will start with introducing students to the idea, especially if they're not used to it. Or even if they are familiar with, they go to a meeting every year and you ask them some of the questions and they answer them every year. What do you want to do? We talked about this. I think the first step is to talk to students just directly when possible. And this is, of course, assuming you and your students are able to have like a communicative relationship or conversation. And I always kind of started this conversation because I knew a lot of my students didn't even know what the words IEP were, or they just like flew away the minute the meetings were over. It's like, you know, that meeting we have every year with your family, and you know how the attendance counselor comes and kind of yells at you because you're never on school on time, and then it turns into like a big problem, or a different scenario, like we're out of there in 20 minutes and you and I just keep working together. It's like, technically that's been working, but we can make it so much better. But in order for us to make it better in next one, for it to show off really good, and for us to tell people you have really great skills and to show them that you have really great skills, we're going to switch directions, and I'm going to ask you a lot more questions during the IEP meeting, or we're going to prepare differently for it, or I want you to take charge of it. You can do this for sure. A lot of this also is at this stage is a little bit more like ego stroking for some students of like, I think you're one of the best writers in all of like 11th grade English, but nobody else knows this because your English teacher has 200 other students, and it's a lot, but you're doing really well in those classes, and we should probably show other people what skills you have. And a little bit of this. I also had students who were the world's greatest talkers and the most social people in the whole world. As you play those skills up for sure with them of, if you are so good at making friends and everybody loves you, then I need you to take those skills. And we're going to bring it into this meeting. And then you're going to convince it, like you're going to show everybody what you can do so that they can see now that you have plans to become a senator in your future, that you can do it. And so it's a little bit of ego stroking, but also truthfully ego stroking. We're just helping them envision what this would look like. But it starts with that conversation of talking about what you're trying to do with them, what will be the change with them. When there's resistance from students, and there often will be, because it's scary to think of, just even nerve-wracking, maybe they have no real interest in it. The conversation will sometimes have to move to, it's your future. I did my thing, right? I went to college and I just talked to my parents about it before then. I prepared for it, and now I'm here and this is my job, and I have a future, but I'm in charge of my future. I can't be in charge of your future. I can definitely help you move your future in the way that you want to do, but it's your future. You have to take the charge of it. I won't be there forever. Parents won't be there forever. And if you're having kind of different opinions from everyone else in your life about what your future looks like, and you're not happy with that, you need to be the one who's in charge of this conversation. We can do that. And this is how it starts. It starts at this meeting, and we can move it from there, that conversation. It's a lot more of a kind of reminding them that as they're getting older, they have to really take the reins of this planning part of their lives. Preferably share those thoughts that they have with us too, so we can put it in the IEP. And there will be tough talks. 100%, there will be tough talks. This is particularly when students are unfamiliar with certain concepts that are in the IEP, and you may be forced to define some of these terms that they are not one to really know about, like the word disability, like what having a learning disability means, or if you read that IEP together, which is in the next kind of area, there is sometimes a lot of like negatively worded language in there, and having to face up to that together is sometimes really difficult, but also important, because if the student doesn't see themselves this way, but everyone else does, it might lead to a really good, then let's change that. How do we change that so we can show them what you're really actually good at? But those tough talks will happen, especially if students are not familiar with those concepts. So it's something to prepare for, but also to make a safe space for your students, to make sure that you're having those conversations, at least in a space where they're comfortable enough asking and expressing whatever it is that they need to express once they hear it. There was a lot of, when I was teaching students specifically, directly, there was a lot of hesitancy to even like use the word disability in front of them, just from a lot of people, because they didn't want to make them stand out. It's like, we're not trying to make you stand out, but how do you know you have one if we don't talk about it? So after the whole introducing part, that's probably what I honestly would say is one of the bigger hurdles, getting the students on board with you. Some also going to be there the whole time with you. All right, let's do it. Sounds like fun. Or you have a wonderful student who will do anything to, like, if you say, like, this is the next thing we're going to do, and they're just like, okay, I guess this is what we're going to do. And it might not take as much convincing. But once you've kind of gotten through that first big hurdle, deciding how to do this is the next step, right? So the how to do student involvement takes a million different forms. We can decide a million different things. One of the ways to kind of bring students into this and help them figure out where they want to start this process is to outline, like, step by step, make an agenda essentially of what happens in your typical IEP or transition planning parts of that meeting. And so I'm a checklister, but I'm also, I say special ed teachers we're checklisters to death. We'll checklist everything. And so I'll just like take it every little thing that happens. First, we talk about this, then we talk about this. Usually this is when your psych comes in. This is when your other teacher comes in. And I'll just like outline all of these steps. And we'll talk about them and we'll remember, oh yeah, that did happen last year. Where do you pick one thing first? And we're going to practice getting ready for this one part here. And you can help students kind of pick the one that they want. Sometimes they're pretty like, oh, that one looks good. I want to talk about that. I have no interest in talking about how I'm doing in math. Math is the worst subject I'm in, but I can talk about how I'm doing in English because I love English. So you can have students kind of pick and choose, but you have to first show them where how that structure the meeting typically goes. And at this point, you're also defining what participation means, knowing that participation can look so many different ways. We have students who are the world's greatest speakers. They should be in debate competitions the way that they are able to convince others to do things. And like, we have those wonderful students. We have students who will stumble over their words, but still have the abilities to. We just have to help them get more comfortable. We have others who writing is their, like, they are the most expressive through writing. Especially now, we know so many students have TikTok accounts and they can edit videos and create content and all of these wonderful things. Lean into the thing that they're really good at and help them define that as a way to participate in this meeting. We also have students who, like, their work speaks for itself in so many ways, so we can help them put together a portfolio. And maybe there's a combination of those things that happen, the speaking and the talking and the portfolio, all of these different things, but defining that, helping them define what participation means. It's like the beauty of the IEP of not a lot of things are that well defined, to be perfectly honest. Like, participation is not well defined in IGA and IEPs, but that also gives us leeway to help students figure out, like, your level of participation is this right now. And then something to note, that level of participation, some are go hung and they're going to come with you the whole meeting and they're going to take over everything, and it's beautiful. And then some will say all of 7 sentences that they prepared and they're sweating bullets while they did it. And that's okay. Baby steps are still steps. There's progress being made. There's like the little bit of muscles. We don't go from, I've never been to a gym and I'm lifting 300, I don't know, you can tell I don't lift anything 300 pounds of weight, and like, I can do it tomorrow, versus I start small and I get 5 pounds and 10 pounds and moving forward. And one day I will build a skill to be able to have taken over a lot of these sections myself. But defining this part, and I also think this is a really fun conversation to have with students. You can, like, put out all of these examples, ask them for more. What are you really good at? What of any of these seem interesting? How would you do it? Talk to me about it. Especially if it's something like a TikTok video kind of idea. They have perfected the 3-minute video. Let them perfect the 3-minute video related to their skills, but show that off to other people. It would be amazing. So we've introduced students to it. We've had these big talks with them. We're deciding their level of participation. We're deciding where it is that they feel most comfortable starting this exploration. Just because we had those parts of those conversations doesn't mean tomorrow we can go to the IEP and be like, all right, your turn, talk about your goals. You need to practice those things. You need to learn and practice. Learning those concepts, for some students, like I mentioned, this will be brand new. It will require those additional conversations, those additional talks as you go through. Something like strengths, interests, preferences, skills, like that part of the transition plan that asks for that. Students are going to say, I have no skills. I've never thought of the word skills before. I had 0 of them in my life. And now you got to bring in all these other sources and all these other tests that you've done and it takes a lot of co-working on this with your student. And it's going to lead to a lot of like, moments of, and maybe some beautiful light bulby type moments, but very much moments are going to be happening. In the resource organizer, I have a bunch of different resources, but one of them is the student directed transition planning curriculum. And that one is a free curriculum, but it also has so many things about how to have these conversations. It has scripts and reproducible, all of this information. I think you should take a look at it, download it, say that you did it yourself. It's yours. It is very helpful in figuring out where these conversations might be happening, or just in general facilitating them when you know a topic or concept coming up is not necessarily going to be the one, or it might be a difficult one, right? When we talk about practice, after you've determined with your student what it is that they're going to do, are they going to talk, are they going to write, how are they going to participate in this situation, or in this next meeting that we have in 7 months and however long away it's going to be, is to practice. And that this is sometimes like a little bit of a daunting part for some students. I usually you should start one-on-one, right, with a comfort person. Once they've like, okay, I worked this out, I've done it twice with my my school counselor, and I'm really comfortable with her, and she helped me a lot and like helped me get over some anxiety things about this. Great, now we're going to do a one-on-one with someone who's not necessarily a comfort person, someone you like, but someone who you feel a little bit more nervous to talk about this stuff with. Could be in and out of school, that's fine. If the student created a video, you can share it with others. You can talk about things that could be edited. You did that really well, but I think you should maybe also add some information about your extracurricular activities. Nobody knows you play soccer in the community league because you're not in the school team, but you're really good and you love it, and all of your friends are in this team. So even if on the IEP last year it said that you don't really have a lot of friends, that's not true. You have a ton of friends. We just didn't know about it because we didn't know you'd played soccer somewhere else. And so like conversations like this should happen, and these products that students are creating, or the practices that they're doing to get ready for that IEP meeting or the transition part of the meeting, we can add to it, we can help them, but they need to be comfortable for sharing their progress along the way as they're practicing with others. And that will help build some of those muscles to like then go into an IEP meeting with a bunch of adults who have traditionally may have like felt, or they have felt kind of judgy about of like, I come in this meeting and they talk about my grades and I'm not that good at these classes, but I'm really good at this. And they never talk about that. It gets into, you're preparing them to be able to stand there or sit there and show off their skills, which for some is really not something they're accustomed to. Not every student is like someone who's ready to be the shining star. If you're going to use something like a script, and I'll show you some examples in the next slide. Scripts are, I think, very, very useful, especially a really good place for a lot of students to start. And I've always kind of like a guided notes type of script of like, I give them the first sentence starters, or I have them kind of fill in the blank. And then as we go, and as maybe they did a very guided script the first year, and if I had them again the next year, we took away some of those guides, and now they can, as we go on, and every meeting that they have, the students are able to take a little bit more of it on their own without having so much of the script, because now they're building the skills to have those conversations on their own or with support still, but mostly led by themselves. And then another kind of very easy one, especially when you have students who work so hard on this really great project, end of the term project, and they got a good grade, but like once it was over, nobody ever brought any more attention to it. Have your students practice presenting their work products regularly. And presenting doesn't have to mean like standing up in front of the class or in front of the group. It could literally just mean like, hey, I did this and I worked on it this way, and the end result was this, and I got a grade, and I'm really proud of myself for it. And it's all of like 3 sentences, but if it happens regularly, students are becoming more used to talking about themselves in this way, and like a very positive, I worked on this and I can get better doing this, but this is what I did so far. Next time I will do this instead. And it's again, those muscles that need to be built up. So I have a couple examples here for just what the different levels of participation could look like. So making a video, you can have a student make a video about themselves. You can have different parts of edited in there. I've seen a couple, I just don't have permission to share them, so I didn't want to bring up a student that I didn't have permission to share, but I've seen a couple where students have like gotten very creative. You can tell this video editing and creation is like a big skill and love and passion of theirs. Other students have made really great PowerPoints about themselves, art projects about themselves, whatever their preferred medium would be to express what they want to share at an IEP meeting. We lean into this. There is no rules or guidelines within IDEA that says student participation needs to be sat at the table with their hands crossed, just waiting for that meeting to be over, because that's a lot, in my experience, a lot of what happens. When we write a script, especially if they're not used to this concept, I think sentence starters are really helpful. And there is literally, you could Google IEP or ITP student script, and you're going to find so many options. And I have a link, but I also know your first presenter shared some links with those as well. And there's a lot of worksheets for creating IEP goals, and we may have them ourselves. You do them all the time as well. And we can have students work on these things, show them at the actual transition part of that meeting, and talk about that process. That is participation. It doesn't need to be a great big fancy thing, but it does. This will be just as helpful in guiding a student to talk about themselves as the script will. And the next one for students who are a little bit more adept at having these conversations and talking on their own, and can just go on and on about themselves for a really wonderful and long time, is to create an agenda for them. And I think generally visual agendas are really helpful for a lot of students. Color-coded ones are very useful, especially so they don't lose track. And if a conversation does start flowing and then they forgot what they go next to, creating an IEP agenda for them of first we talk about this, and then we talk about this, and then we talk about this is really, really helpful. And you can bullet point some things out. You can have them make their own, make it themselves, though in a way that they understand it. If they took the time to make it and then they practiced with you and then they practiced with their mom before that meeting comes, and then at the meeting, they might not even need that agenda, but it'll help support them as they go through. In the same way that we will do if we're presenting or practicing or doing a new lesson. So I also wanted to bring in some examples for students who have more extensive support needs. Those other examples that I shared are far more geared to students with more mild to moderate support needs, who are much more like verbally adept at communication and participation. So in those sense, we expect students to be able to communicate with us, maybe not just verbally, but without a lot of specific issues in like the actual communication piece, and being able to have a conversation or like cognitive responses to a conversation. But we do have, of course, students who have more support needs, who participation will look different for. And we know a lot of the times, especially when it's a far more significant, like severe, profound scale of the need, that it may sometimes be your first, a lot of people's first reaction may be participation is not possible and doesn't feel like it has a point. That is not, we need to get away with that thinking, because participation looks different, but different is not the same thing as saying impossible or pointless. When we look at students who have more extensive support needs, I think there is a division of involvement versus participation. So involvement in this situation would mean being able to take part in the preparation and presentation of this meeting to whichever degree is possible, before a student to actually should be able to in some way share their opinion, even if that is through eye tracking, if that is through like the head nods, the yes, or the pointing. If we know that they are actually saying, yes, I like this, or I am eye tracking to something that I don't want, or a setting that I do want to be in, then they are being involved. It is not the same type of involvement that we have like come to expect for the majority of students who receive special education services, but it is involvement nonetheless. Participation then would be for students who are included in the process. They're at the center of the process of preparing for this meeting, but their personal abilities to provide input are limited. And so these are for students who we don't have any sort of regular communication with, even in whichever other like ways exist. So if they're not able to tell you about their what they don't like or what they do like tell you in some way, then participation in this sense would be to make sure that we are, when we're preparing our documents, our information about these students, that we are saying, based on our observations and our knowledge about the students, or about this student, here's what we know, and here's where we will help kind of move their future planning forward. But it's with everything you know about them, not just that the local Goodwill has some jobs open and you know how to get them in a little bit faster and they can be a door greeter. That's not necessarily the same thing as you taking into account everything that you know about them. In this situation, participation is going to have to come from a couple of different sources. We're going to need everybody who knows and spends time with this student to be able to give us their input, because of course, environment makes a difference. The way the students act at home is not the way that they act with you. And we need people to see both sides of these stories, or at least know that they exist. I do have some videos here, and I'm going to show just one so we could see what involvement may look like. It's a quick one. Oh, it doesn't want to let me. Just kidding. It's because I'm on a different thing. It's fine. I would love for you to see it. I would love for you to show your students. It is just far more to show in the first video that involvement. The teacher projected some things you need to know about me. The student is pointing at them. The student is saying, yes, I do like this. I want to keep trying this. And this is exactly what we would show to families. If possible, we do this with them at the IEP meeting, or if you took a video of you doing it with your students, show that at the IEP meeting. I used to work at a school where we would take our students out, we were Transition Plus. Yes, the video, I'm so sorry. The video is available in the resource folder where my slides are. It's just because I'm on like a different app, but you like on the actual slides, if you open the slides up, you should be able to play those videos. Thank you. One of the bigger things that happens, and I just mentioned it with what happens at home doesn't happen at school. For all parents, they have very little idea what day-to-day looks like and what their students look like in the classroom, what their students look like with their friends at school, what they look like in the cafeteria. If we are able to take videos of students doing this kind of just like general participation and involvement, and we played music time in the classroom and people were just so happy about it. Like he was clapping his hands and having a great time. If we're able to take clips of these videos, share them with those parents at the meeting or the whole IEP team, because not everyone gets to see them in these environments. And it makes a very big difference in the same way that if you saw a student at home and they're off the wall crazy, and then you come into the classroom and they're like, they're perfectly fine in the classroom. We get a different idea of like not their abilities per se, but maybe they're super energized in the morning, and by the time you see them in the afternoons, that energy is real low key. So you've been planning for someone who is far more low key than a work setting might get, or in future like school setting or anywhere else might get. So I'm going to have those here for you. The second video is a student reflecting on their participation now that they were there, and both are really wonderful. Neither are very long, and they make really good, really good tools to help introduce this to other IEP team members who are not aware of how this might even look for students who have more significant disabilities. For participation, again, those students who we will help fill in a lot of these strengths, something like a one-pager is really, really helpful. And one-pagers are just looking at where your strengths and your interests and your preferences and your needs are. Those exact same things that are asked about in the transition planning pages of your IEP. And I have an example here on the left-hand side, and it's about a much younger student, but it gives you the same idea there of this is what I'm really good at, and it's just bullet points. And you can put in a note there, like these things have been observed by multiple members of their team, and we're filling in all the gaps. And based on all of these things that we know about a student, this is how we move forward with transition planning. This is just a really good way to make sure that they are still at the center, but they're participated into that process. All right. Sorry, I just have a comment in the chat. Oh, sorry. The video that I was going to show is in the slides on the Resource Center, just making sure. Okay. The other group of students that I also want to focus on is students from diverse cultural backgrounds. And I include in this second language students. A while back, I did a presentation for LAUSD on transition planning for bilingual students because it takes a turn. And I'm so happy to share that with anyone. But also, what I wanted to really look at was there are significant issues that students from diverse backgrounds will face or have been known to face in IEP meetings that are not necessarily, in addition to, they're not necessarily seen across all of your students. This is a little bit more geared towards bilingual students, but it tends to apply other ways. So some of those known issues is that some students who have second languages or multiple languages are often asked to serve as translators. Even if your district has a translator available, and they're not, we didn't call them because it's a really quick meeting, or we didn't call them because we didn't have time, or they didn't have the right person or the right language available at the moment, making all efforts possible to have a translator who is not the student available is just very prudent. And if you are able to communicate with the family in their native language, that's even better, I'm sure, because it lessens the third party person. I mean, that having the translator, it does make things awkward sometimes because it kind of stops the flow of the conversation. But by not asking our students to be the one who does the translations, we are also helping them have a place in the conversation and not a like a work rule. Like if we're asking them to work, we probably should have paid them for it. By having a different translator, we're not depending on our student. The student is still able to be a part of that conversation. We can now still talk to our student, and they don't have to then turn their responses to the parents, and the parent they don't have to then like convert their responses to us, parent responses to us. They are able to be in the conversation instead of just the translators of the conversation. Often students from different backgrounds will have familial or cultural expectations that may clash with the ones that we are teaching and like have maybe been most commonly supporting our students reach. Our ideas of transition in the United States are very United States focused, of growing independence, and you're going to be your own adult one day, you're going to live on your own one day, and once you turn 18, your family can't tell you what to do, which is silly. Our families still take a lot of places in our students' lives much after 18. But we don't always talk about these things with students from different backgrounds for whom these different expectations may exist, and they may completely clash with what even your student is telling you. Our students who come from different backgrounds, they have a foot in many worlds kind of situation. They are in school with their friends, and they're engaging in like all other popular in social media, and they may have very similar desires for post-school life as their friends do. When they do want to live on their own, they want to go to this school in a different state, they want to work in this area and not in their mom's computer business. I just saw the word computer, and not in their mom's computer business or any other area that their family specifically expects them to do. And that is a clash, and that one that we're not always planning for. The first thing to do is ask students, oh, you've told me that you really want to do this thing. You want to become an engineer, you wanted to go to MIT, and you want to live on campus over there, which makes sense because we're in California. Have you had that exact same talk with your parents? Do they know that this is what you want, that this is the track that you're trying to pursue? And what do they think about it? Are they on board? Are they able to support you? What do you need to present this information to them if you've never done that before? If you just have it in your head and you're 17 and you're ready to apply for colleges, but we haven't talked to your parents about that, and they have no idea this is where you're going. And if you get accepted, which is wonderful, what do we do now? How do we have that conversation? Or not just about, it could be about work, it could be about living situations. There are also times where the student is totally on board with what their family wants to do, or maybe they're just don't feel like they're in a position where they can kind of go against what their family expects them to do. And in those situations, we still need to have these conversations. We need to be able to talk to them about these are not easy conversations, I'm going to put this out there, but we need to be able to help facilitate some of these topics for them, because if we don't, solutions won't be made. Our student will graduate, and they may end up in a place that they didn't really want to be, or they weren't prepared for the place that they did go to, work or family or whatever. So these are really just so important. One of the other bigger issues, and those of us who have many students who are from multilingual speakers, if English is not their native or preferred language, finding a test that is translated into their language, a transition related assessment, is so difficult sometimes. It's like ridiculously difficult. When possible, you should look for one that has been translated, knowing that a lot of them have been kind of translated into Spanish is a coup, because there's a lot of more Spanish speakers in the US than any other non-English language. But when we look at those scores, we need to interpret what they mean with context for our student. Did they understand all of those concepts being asked? Is that a question that they have been accustomed to seeing in Spanish? We may have talked about it in English. Did it translate the right way? It's part of looking at their scores with a little bit more just visual or just like scrutiny to make sure that we're interpreting how they're doing and how they're assessing and what their abilities are and strengths and needs with context to their language and their cultural background as well. I have a resource here for you. And again, it is linked in the resource organizer. It's a transition assessment handbook. It comes out of the University of Oklahoma. And they just have a ton of all the different transition assessments, and you can go through them and they'll say which ones are available in different languages as well. So some examples would be like the AIR self-determination scale is free. It's available in English, French, and Spanish. Okay. I wanted to bring this about just to also look at, we can do so many wonderful things to prepare our students. The first time that we go into an IEP meeting should not be the first time that everyone else on that team is aware that the student's going to take over. Everyone else should have at least like been given the heads up. And well, just to like lessen any contention that may happen or confusion of like, why are you talking first? Aren't we supposed to? We've only ever done it with the teacher taking the lead. I don't understand what's happening here. If the family members are able to be there and are present, this hopefully is not a surprise to them that they're going to be, I'll make sure to put a better link to that workbook. I'm sorry about that. This should not be a big surprise to like any other person, especially not the family members. They may not know exactly what it will look like, but we need to make sure that everybody is aware. Part of this is that perspective shift. So in the student-directed transition planning curriculum, there are these slides in there, and the slides are just very basic, but they did it as part of a study where before an IEP meeting came up, they played these slides and they have like a voiceover. They play these slides for everybody in the IEP team meeting, and it just is like 10 slides and it says over and over and over again, this meeting is about the student. This meeting is about the student. The student is the part of the meeting. It's just like the same kind of sentence repeated different ways. And they show that before and after having this like little slide presentation play for the IEP team, the members of this team feel much more like aware and confident of, excuse me, they feel much more aware and confident of like what the student will be taking a little bit more charge, or they'll remember this is about the student and not so much about me not liking that the lawyer came this time around or what, what have you. It helps with the perspective shift. If that is not available, then we need to be working to sell that change to the rest of the IPT members, showing them that information from those first slides of, did you know that we've had this meeting every year for the past 8 years that the student has been here or has had an IEP, and they've never once introduced themselves. And they've also never once spoken up about how they're doing in class, even though I got like their written response where I shared on their behalf, they have not said that. And so like sometimes bringing those things to mind will help just a lot more people understand like, oh, I guess you're right, we haven't done that. And we probably should do that. There's also the ability, or we should share some of those benefits that students will gain from this. And like the student has practice. We tell everybody in that meeting, this student has practice. We will show you. It's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be seamless, but they have worked on this, and we're not going to take away the opportunity for them to show what they have worked on at their own meeting. And then sharing examples is just as important. Student-led meetings is not at all a foreign concept in anywhere else, but maybe special education, which is crazy because it's really where it came from. In elementary schools, middle schools, high schools, students are responsible for sharing their work and their progress at those parent-teacher conferences. This is like a far increasing practice across the country. And if we're expecting little kids to be doing this, then why on earth am I not expecting the student who we're talking about in their face in front of them to be doing this as well? And we can share lots of examples. There are a ton of examples on YouTube of this. I literally just Googled like student-led meeting, and they can go from really cute to really in-depth to anywhere in between. When there is pushback, I think it is far more helpful to explain or to begin explaining that what exactly this change will look like, especially if this is the first time one of our students is going to be doing this, and no one else on this team is familiar with that. chances are that student may not be starting off at like full force, taking over everything in that meeting at once. And so we're going to say this change, moving it towards student-led or student-directed, is that they chose the order of the agenda and they want to talk about these 3 items. They want to start the conversation about these 3 items, and that's exactly what we're going to follow. Like, here's the agenda for today. This is exactly what the change will look like. Explaining that this doesn't take away from anyone's responsibilities in completing that IEP or overseeing it and making sure it's compliant with the law is still very important. But understanding we can change the order of the conversation. It doesn't always have to start exactly in the way that it's written out, even though it's easier sometimes. But if this is what makes the student more comfortable, and especially if they're getting older and it's their meeting, again, we're going to always say that it's their meeting, and we need to make sure that we are kind of catering to that and adjusting the meeting out, like parameters and outlines, to help them do that on their own as well, on their own as much as they can. In general, I don't know if this is the a resource that you were already given, but I do have a copy of it in the organizer. And I think it's just such a good read. And you may have gotten the concept. The article is called "Why is this cake on fire?" And it's just asking you to imagine, like, you have a birthday party every year, or they talk about this party that you have every year and you've never been, but they talk and they make decisions for you and they get you things, and that's when you got your laptop and the accommodations and all those other wonderful things. And it's not until you turned 14 or 16, whichever one the law said, that they started bringing you into this birthday party, and you have not been there, and all of a sudden they expected you to start talking out loud, and they wanted, you don't even know why this cake is on fire, being a birthday cake. It's such a good analogy to use and resource to share with families and other members of the IEP team that I highly suggest just reading it through and looking at it, because it makes a difference in helping that perspective shift move over. Even if you're the one who uses the analogy of, like, I invite you every year, I can't expect you to just come on up here and start talking and telling me wonderful things that we haven't done before. After the ICP meeting, after you've done some work on helping the students with this area, or after you've just talked in general, and you're going to keep these conversations going, get ready for the next year, get ready for the year after that, or move it on to the next student, I wanted to share 2 specific resources that I think really help in continuing these conversations. So the first would be the Self-Determination Toolbox, and it comes from that I'm Determined resource. And they're honestly the ones who lead the charge in making student involvement resources and information very accessible to families and students. And so none of their materials are like particularly graphic and complicated, but they have all of this really, really great information. And they have so many templates and videos and things to reference them. I would recommend checking out just their website in general, but the toolbox is so helpful. There's a lot of curricular documents that you can use in helping have those big conversations and moving it forward. Great, now we talked about it. And maybe that meeting didn't go the way we thought it was going to go, and we practiced for it to go. How do we make it better next year? We have a whole year to work on it. We can make some of these things into their next year IP goals. We can move it forward. If you're introducing this to students who are about to graduate or leave the school system, then we can maybe try putting it again at the end of the year. Let's have like a final bring everybody back conversation, reflect on everything that's happened, what you're going to do now. It doesn't have to stop just at the IEP. It can continue. I don't know if you guys know that. It can continue. Time is the thing that, of course, nobody can compensate for. Time is the thing. So then, I also wanted to share the transition bell ringers. These are just my favorite ever in the whole world. The transition bell ringers, those bell ringers are the first 5 minutes or the last 5 minutes of class where you have the students like your exit ticket or your entry ticket or whatever it is we want to call them, that prompts that we give them to start the conversation, to start the day. There are 3 different sets of slides. There's transition, general, there's personal finance, and then there's like maybe a self-determination. I don't remember what the third one is, excuse me. But there's like 50 slides in each. There's just a bunch of different prompts that you can use with students, and of course use those as jumping off boards if you want. But it's starting those conversations and it's keeping them going, and you can adjust them. Last year, or a couple months ago, you all had IEP meetings. I don't know how you guys can do your meetings. That'd be wonderful if they were all done in a month. And now that we did it, I want some reflections. How, since then, what do you know about yourself that you're really good at? What do you know about yourself that you're really good at school or at home? Or we can just move those conversations forward. Sometimes knowing like what am I going to ask tomorrow? I have no idea. Use your bell ringers. They're so helpful. And I brought up that they have the personal finance ones mainly because I mean, how many times have you said, I really wish they taught me this in school? And it's like taxes and budgeting and investments and stuff. And so the personal finance one is really helpful for this. And it could be related to some of those IEP goals that you have for your students. All right. So those are, excuse me, those are my slides. I normally have more slides than I can fit, but I also knew that this was a topic I want to always talk about. I want my students, I didn't always feel this way, but I now 100% just want my students to take the charge, to lead the way, to tell me what it is that they want to do, to show me in whichever way they are able to, that this is the future that they are working towards. And if it is a feasible thing, and we've had that conversation about it being feasible and you're all gung ho for it, then I'm on your boat, we're going to do it together. But it's not always the easiest thing to do. And it's something that took me maybe like 8 years to like really get on board with. I'm like, I don't know, we'll see. But once you start seeing it just really taking off, it makes a world of a difference for a student to be able to lead all of it on their own. They are so amazing when they get a chance to show off their skills. All right, everybody. So here is my contact information and that first half questions QR code. And it's also, of course, on the organizer. I'm going to say that 2 million times. That link will lead you straight to my like appointment line. I'm so happy to meet with anyone one-on-one Zoom. I do never have to like ask for anything. Just go on in there, make an appointment if you ever have questions or need resources or anything. And then my little self-promotion plug, at the University of the Pacific, we have a master's in teaching credential program. And it's just ideal for anybody who needs to finish their credential or is interested in pursuing a different credential. And really, we are also quite geared towards paraprofessionals and other workers who are in the world of education and are basically the world's greatest teachers, but we need them to get their credentials so we can officially have them that way as well. So please share this resource and any other questions you may have. I'm so happy to answer.
Great, thank you. Yes, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A. I loved it, Belkis. I think it was really great to, I was jotting down notes, but I love how you shared those examples, and I want to go back and watch those videos that are in that resources organizer. But I like how the idea of a student, just maybe if they're nervous, they could do a pre-recorded video. And students are kind of used to doing that with their phone and TikTok and Snapchat and things. So that could be a way that they're included that I hadn't really thought of before. So I really liked that. And then I love the idea of the phrase to just say to a student, like, you know, that meeting that we have every year, because that is, you can't get any more student friendly than that type of language, rather than, you know, the IEP, and a lot of them look at you with a blank stare. So I really liked the specific examples that you gave, and it was inspirational. And I hope everyone in the audience agreed. I think so from the chat, everyone is being complimentary in there. So thank you so much, Belkis.
Definitely. I see that some of the links I put in there are not working. If you give me like 5 minutes, I will put them right on up for you guys. And I'll put a little note there like fixed, just so you have them.
Okay,
Perfect.
great.
That's what I was gonna just mention to you too. That does seem like a few of the links are not working, but thank you for beating me to the punch there. So if everyone can just give Belkis a couple of minutes, those links will be up and running.
And I changed, Belkis, I did switch over that transition assessment handbook one, I believe. Just double check it.
Oh,
but
yes, I do. I see that one. That's
and then I think the other one was the bell ringers. So that's on there as well. So let's just do like a 2-minute break. We're going to give the next presenter, Dr. Yeager, a minute to have his screen shared and ready to go. And then we'll come back and I'll do an introduction and hand it over to him.
Thank you.
Thanks again, Belkis. Have a great rest of the day. Thank you.
You too. Thank you.
Okay, I know that was a short and sweet little break, but thanks everybody for tuning back in. And to close out our series, our seminar for today around student-centered transition planning, we are very lucky to have Dr. Christopher Yeager here to share with us about centering student voice, strengths, and feedback. Dr. Yeager is currently an assistant professor at the University of Texas at El Paso. He used to be a high school special education teacher in Las Vegas, Nevada, and his teaching and research interests are in the area of culturally and linguistically responsive transition assessment and planning strategies for students with learning disabilities and emotional and behavioral disabilities. So we're very happy that you're here to help wrap up our Saturday seminar today. And I will hand it over to you. Thank you for being here.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to talk to you all. I will be asking you all to put some things into the chat. So be prepared to type if you're comfortable with sharing. I'd love as much participation in this as possible. I just feel like with Zoom meetings, I really like to know that people are there and I'm not just talking in my empty office room on a Saturday right now. So feel free to ask questions in the chat and let me know that you are there. We're gonna get started 1 minute early, but I'm gonna start with a quick introductions. Then we're gonna talk about centering student voice using transition interviews. After that, we're going to talk about making the transition process a little bit more positive by centering students' strengths through informal transition assessments. And then lastly, we're going to talk about making sure our process really is student-centered by asking students how their experience was and learning from them. I think that's really critical, is to gather that feedback and make sure that we're constantly improving our practice. At the end, hopefully we'll have a little bit of time for questions and we can talk a little bit if you have any questions, but feel free to ask those in the chat throughout. All right, so go ahead. Can you please introduce yourself in the chat? Maybe you did this in the other ones. I wasn't there, I'm sorry. Could you just type your name? I just wanna check that you're there, type your name and tell me how many years experience you have in transition. So I'm Chris and I've been in transition for 7 years. All right, I see a bunch coming in. So as you're, after you do that, I want just 1 or 2 words in the chat. I know you've been talking a lot about student-centered transition planning and why it's important and how we get kids involved and how we really value their perspectives. But I don't know if you talked about this quote, and this is really my why. This is why I think student-centered transition planning is important. I think it's something that we have to do because it's the right thing to do. And historically, it's what we need to do to improve our practice. So in the chat, I want you to tell me 1 or 2 words about what the quote, "Nothing about us without us," means to you. Nothing about us without us is one of the catchphrases for the disability rights movement. And I really think it connects to this idea of student-centered transition planning. So in the chat, maybe what's 1 or 2 words that the phrase "nothing about us without us" means to you and why you think it's important. I got inclusion, involvement. We can't help our students without their input. Ownership, awareness, authenticity. I love that one. Respect. Empowerment. I love the participation. Y'all are great. Give yourself a pat on the back. Support. We got more coming in. All 100 plus of you are doing it. Self-advocacy. It's what special ed is all about. I completely agree. I think, sometimes we think the IEP, like we go to a lot of IEP meetings as professionals. We do these every day, every week. It's not that big of a deal. But for the student and their family, it is a big deal. It's once a year. It is the opportunity to reflect, and it's the opportunity for the student to make sure that everything that we're doing, they're involved with. The student knows themselves better than anyone else. I love that quote in the chat. So one way that we can make sure that transition planning is about the student and involves the student and empowers the student is by talking to them. I know that sounds very simple, but it's hard. As transition specialists, as teachers, interviews take a while. It's hard to have deep conversations with students and families because it takes so long and it requires your focus. And so many times we're stretched in so many different ways. But truly, it's the only way to get to know somebody and make sure that transition planning is about them. So we have to have conversations with students. We cannot just look at documents. We cannot just talk to the teacher or their parents. We've got to talk to the student at some point and build that relationship. Now, I'm not saying you have to do this all the time for hours, but at some point you need to make that connection with the student, or else transition planning is not going to be student-centered because you haven't heard from them. A transition interview is an opportunity to reflect and look forward. It's an opportunity to hear the students' authentic goals. What are their real goals? Not what's just written on the IEP, not the canned statement, but what do they truly want for the future? And that's what a transition goal should be. It should be real. It should be something that is on their mind, that the student wants. It's an opportunity to listen and learn. It's an opportunity to spend time together, build rapport, and earn trust. We're talking about this child's future. We're talking about their work, college, daily living, these scary, scary things for high schoolers. They're not going to open up to you unless you've shown that you listen, that you care, and that you've built some sort of relationship together. That's the only way they're going to share. And my background is working with students with emotional and behavioral disabilities. And that's what I wrote this article in, that's in the resources that I'd love for you all to check out if you're interested in this topic, but especially students with emotional and behavioral disabilities. You need to build that trust. You need to build that comfort before you're going to be able to talk to them and really get them to open up and give you those honest responses about transition. So where do interviews fit in the transition assessment cycle? Belkis gave you a ton of really great transition assessments. They really fit throughout the whole cycle. We need to be using interviews and conversations with students to inform what we're doing. So at the top, you can see the comprehensive transition assessment. That's really what you do annually in order to prepare for the IEP. Is you do that transition assessment, you find out everything, you do those formal assessments, and then you do that longer formal interview where you're really asking the student what do they want to do in their future, and how are you going to help them get there. But it's also important to do ongoing transition assessment. We can't do it just every year. People's minds change constantly in high school and in adulthood. So we always need to be checking in and doing ongoing transition assessment to make sure we're up to date with what this student really wants and what their experience has been with the services that we provided. So then we do shorter, more informal interviews to catch up and to make sure we know what's going on. As we're doing goal setting and person-centered planning, which I believe you talked about in previous sessions, and then we start implementing those coordinated activities and services. Hopefully they're student-centered and they're exactly what the student wants and what they're interested in doing as a job or to prepare for college or independent living. And then we're doing ongoing transition progress monitoring assessment to make sure what we're doing is working, the students are learning the skills, the students are enjoying it, they're getting a lot out of those transition services. And again, during that time period, we want to also incorporate interviews with stakeholders. So talking to their job coach, talking to their employer, talking to their camp counselor, talking to their family, talking to their teachers to make sure that what they're doing, what everyone's doing is working. So I've included some strategies to think about, and I'm going to run through these. And then I said, I'm going to get you all participating, and I will. But here are some strategies for the pre-interview. So especially, you know, my heart is with, you know, students with emotional and behavioral disabilities. These are the things that you have to do to make sure that that interview is going to be successful. You have to have informal conversations to build trust and support. Students are trust and rapport. Students are not going to open up to you if you're some stranger coming from the district office that they've never seen before. They're not going to tell you their deepest, darkest visions for what they're going to do when they grow up. So it's a good practice to get introduced by someone trusted. Maybe that student doesn't have a lot of close relationships with people, but you find that person that they trust, and then that person can vouch for you and say, hey, this person, they're here to help you with college, career, independent living. You should talk to them. They're really great. And then they're going to be more likely to open up to you. Share something about yourself. Again, people are not going to share with us if they think we're just some stranger who's there doing their job with a checklist. You need to share a little bit and be a little bit vulnerable. Tell them what you wanted to be when you were in high school and how that didn't work out, and then you did something else. Just talk to them, open up a little bit. That is super helpful. Next is express interest and check in often. Again, you're just making them realize that you are trustworthy, you are someone who cares, and you're someone who's around. You're not just going to leave and abandon after you've done your job and you've done your IEP meeting to see them next year. You're someone that's going to be integral in their educational career. The next step is to make sure that you're conducting strengths-based assessments. Oftentimes, we can ruin some of those relationships that we built with students by everything that we're doing is negative. They have deficits in this. You have weaknesses here. We want students to be empowered and we want students to start thinking positively. So we want to give assessments that highlight their strengths. And I'm going to talk about that next after we do interviews. But that can really help get that ball rolling. It's important to identify deficits. I'm not saying that that's not important, but at least at the beginning, we want to highlight those strengths and those positive things so we can build that relationship and get students excited about transition. Next, before the interview, you might need to provide instruction or work with the teachers to have them provide instruction to explicitly teach communication skills. Maybe the student uses an AAC device. And we want to make sure that they know how to use that in order to answer the transition related questions and have the vocabulary to discuss that. And then we also need to teach self-advocacy skills as well, so that students can start to speak up for themselves. And in order to self-advocate, you have to know yourself. So maybe we encourage students to journal before doing the interview so that they can really reflect and think about themselves. Some of those disability awareness activities that Belkis was talking about, and then just building those communication and leadership skills as well, so that they can be assertive in what they want for the future and really talk about themselves. Encourage the student to explore transition. I don't know how many transition interviews you've done where the student just says, no, yes, I don't know. So that's not a beneficial transition interview. So you want to make sure that you've given them an opportunity to prepare, to think about what they want to do and what their responses are going to be before talking to them. And then lastly, bring in guest speakers and mentors. Bring in people who have gone through the same thing that they have gone through. So if you have a student that exited and went to Project Search and is really doing great, have them talk to a class of freshmen about what it's like to have a mental health condition and get accommodations in the workforce, because that will truly get students more comfortable with this process if they see that someone else has gone through it before. As a teacher, as a transition specialist, we can always connect to students in that way. So we need to bring in students who have graduated, who have exited, who have disabilities to really connect with students as mentors and show them that it can be done. And then lastly, review educational records and speak to others to prepare. When you're doing an interview, you don't want to bring up traumatic things. You don't want to talk about sensitive topics without being fully prepared. Because so much of transition can be extremely sensitive. So you want to make sure you do your homework and really get prepared before that interview. You want to hold interviews. So this is during the interview strategies, hold them in a comfortable and confidential setting. Provide water and snacks, sit at an even level, choose a quiet setting. They're sharing important things about themselves. You want to make sure it's comfortable. And then you also want to make sure it's a little bit special too. When I do research interviews, I always bring snacks or something, and it makes students feel like, oh, I get to come out of class and this is kind of fun. I feel like I'm on a talk show or whatever the case is. Make it a little bit special. And then make sure you're at an even setting. You're talking to each other as equals. You're not talking down to them. And it's just a little bit more relaxed than perhaps a typical teacher-student interaction, because you are talking about adulthood and you want to make sure you're on an even setting. Review the purpose and expectations for the interview. Begin with the most interesting topics, then ease into more challenging or personal topics later. So again, build that trust, build that comfort, and then students can really open up about their truest, visions, goals, fears about the future, so that you can really work on those moving forward. And then again, provide frequent praise and encouragement as students are answering responses. And then make sure you're really listening and not judging. An interview is a chance to learn about that student, not a chance for you to impose your beliefs about what they should do in the future. It's about listening. And then later we can, maybe push them in a different direction, or we can support them, to make the best possible choices. But during that interview, we really just want to listen and definitely not judge. After the interview, we want to provide incentives and provide positive reinforcement for participating. So give extra credit, points, tokens, or other personalized incentives for participating in this process. And then give that, that encouragement. How will this interview shape future transition activities? If you talk to me, it's going to make your classes more aligned to your interests. It's going to make your transition activities more aligned to your interests, so students really get something out of it. It's always really important after an interview to summarize and reflect on what was discussed. Make sure you highlight the key points and what you're going to do moving forward. And then discuss how and if the information will be shared. We want students to trust us. So if they're opening up and then we go around and tell their parents or tell their teacher these vulnerable things that they said without their permission, we're going to lose trust. So we want to make sure they know, yes, this information that you said, we're going to be talking about this at the IEP meeting, or I'm going to be sharing this, or, hey, you can tell me these things in confidence and I'm not going to tell anyone unless it's something that I have to, share. And then lastly, just continue those informal conversations to deepen trust and rapport, because you're going to be doing this type of conversation annually at least. So you want to make sure that students are going to be continuing to open up with you. Okay, so what do you talk about in the transition interviews, and how do you ask these questions? So Seidman wrote a book on interviewing, and he provided really great example, or a really great quote on how to do an interview. And he said, you want to listen more, talk less, and ask real questions. If you do those things, those interviews are going to be much, much better. So I'm going to provide a couple tips, and then I want you in the chat to follow along with me. So the first tip is to be open-ended. Interview questions should elicit responses that are descriptive rather than one word like yes or no. Ask open-ended questions with enough think time and encouragement. You'll be surprised at what you find out. So I want you to tell me which one is an example and which one is a non-example of an open-ended question. Will you go to college or not? Or what excites you about going to college? Which one's better? Type it in the chat. 2. Perfect. Yes, what excites you about going to college? That's going to give you more information. Or what scares you about going to college? But will you go to college or not? That's yes or no. That's a checklist. You don't need to be doing that in an interview. You can send that home with a student. They can do that on their own. But the conversations that you want to be having involve more of those feelings or those more deeper thought processes. Perfect. 1 or 2, I like that in the chat. So the next thing you want to do in an interview is you want to make sure you follow a logical sequence. Jumping from one topic to another can be jarring and doesn't have the natural flow of the conversation. So ask a logical sequence of questions, and this shows that you're really genuinely interested. So which one is an example of logical sequence? What are some of your hobbies? In the future, could you see any of those hobbies becoming a job? Or what are some of your hobbies? Do you want to go to college in town or out of state? All right, I see a bunch of ones. Y'all are on it. Yes, you want to make sure these conversations flow. You're not just going, checking a box, asking all these required questions that you have to do for your job. You want to make sure the conversation builds and flows. Perfect. All right, you also want to make sure questions are short and simple. Sometimes the shortest, most simple questions elicit the best responses. You want to use straightforward language. So which one is an example of a short and simple question? Can you evaluate some of the instances you've demonstrated critical self-advocacy or self-determination skills in the community, at home, or in school environments? Versus, can you describe a time you stood up for yourself? That's an easy one, right? 2, of course, it's much, much more straightforward. We want to use language that students know, the simplest, most straightforward language, rather than just IEP, special education, transition jargon. We don't want to be using that. And with parents as well, we want to use simple, straightforward language. So number 2 is the example. All right, next, we want our questions to be positive. We want this to be a positive experience, like they're on a talk show. If the interview feels like an interrogation instead of a conversation, you're doing it wrong. Make sure to keep questions positive and get excited about transition. So which one is an example of a positive question? On time and regular attendance is important for all jobs. What type of job would make you excited to show up on time every single day? Versus, you must show up on time every day to keep a job. Why do you keep failing time and time again at school to do that? All right, I love it. But I've heard number 2 before, folks. I've seen IEP meetings and transition assessments, and teachers or transition specialists feel like it's a chance to get the student or to catch them or to teach them a lesson. No, right? We want to keep these positive so we can learn about the student and their experience. We can discipline or we can have those other types of conversations later. All right, so 1 is the example, 2 is not. All right, next, we want to be unassuming in the questions that we ask students to get to know them. We don't want to put words in their mouth. Even if students are reluctant, avoid asking leading questions to elicit certain responses. A lot of students are just going to want to make you happy and please you to make you go away. So they're going to tell you stuff that you want to hear. We don't want that, right? We don't want to be putting words into their mouth. We want to get the real answer from students. So 1 would be, where do you plan on living the summer after high school? Versus, after high school, you're not going to be able to live on your own yet. So you're going to keep living with your father, right? No, we don't want to put words in their mouth. You're right. It's number 1. Ask students what we want, ask students their true opinion. So number 1 is the example. All right, next, we want to be personalized. We want to show students that we know them. Always attempt to connect questions back to prior discussions you've had with the student. Frame questions with a personalized statement to show that you listen and care. Have you ever worked, volunteered, or had any chores? Versus, in class, you mentioned that you worked in a hardware store last summer. What were the best and worst parts of that job? Which one's better? 2, I love it. Y'all are fast. So that one's hard, right? If we're an outsider, we've never met this student before as a transition specialist. You might not know anything about the student. That's why it's important to do your homework, to talk to other people and come prepared, because students are going to realize if you care or if you don't care and you're just doing this to check a box. So number 2 would be the example of a personalized question. All right, and next we have imaginative questions. So sometimes breaching certain topics can be hard. Ask the student to be imaginative. Try role-playing questions to gain new insights. So which one is an example of an imaginative question? Imagine I were speaking to your mother. What would she say about you living on your own when you turn 18? Versus, what are your parents' perspectives on independent living? Good, I see a lot of ones. I like one, right? Because that can be kind of fun. What would your mother say? Or what would your teacher say about this? Or what do your friends say about you? That can give students a chance to really reflect and think outside the box. Versus number two, that's another one of those complicated. It's not really a simple question. It's so obtuse, rather than the first one is much more concrete. All right, I flew through it, right? Those are all the examples of transition interview questions and how to improve those. Before we move on to the next one, I want you all to, are these questions somewhere we can use them? Absolutely. In the resources link, I provide a bunch of questions for you. I also provide a transition matrix that has a bunch of questions for a bunch of different topics. You want to make sure questions are individualized. So I'm not about like just coming up with a script of questions and saying everyone use these questions on in transition interview. You got to come up with your own questions. They have to be real. You have to come up with them on the spot. They have to be individualized for the student. I give some examples in the transition matrix, but they're not all going to apply to each of your students. You have to make them on your own because that's the only way for it to be student-centered. It's going to be centered on some other student if I wrote all the questions, but there are some great examples in there. All right. Next, I wanted to talk about incorporating strengths into the transition process. Incorporating student strengths can also help you build trust. It also helps students build their self-confidence. It increases student and family engagement. A lot of times parents and students don't want to come to IEP meetings because they feel like it's a negative experience. They feel like they're being talked down to, they're being told they're not good enough, they're being told these are all your deficits. But if you incorporate strengths-based assessments and incorporate strengths into IEP meetings, they're going to be a much more positive experience for students, and their families are going to be more likely to show up and to participate and to get involved because it's much more positive. It also prepares students for job interviews. Most job interviews, you have to brag a little bit. You have to talk about yourself and how what you're good at, what you're not good at. So these strengths assessments help students build that self-awareness in order to talk about themselves in job interviews or college interviews or whatever they're interviewing for. And then it also demonstrates a value for diversity and equity. By highlighting student strengths, you are valuing their interests and their culture, and they're talking about what they're good at in their community with their family. And then you're also valuing equity as well, because a lot of students with disabilities, they get negative feedback throughout their whole academic careers. You're not good at reading. You're not good at this. You act up. And by this, you're changing the narrative. Yeah, maybe you're not good at some things, but you do have strengths. That's what equity is, right? You are good at something, and you should pursue that after school, and we'll help you get there. So that's that push for equity. This activity that I'm going to show you next comes from an article that I wrote with a colleague on strengths-based transition planning, a positive approach for students with learning disabilities. Like I was mentioning, in my experience with students with learning disabilities, a lot of them don't know they're in special education. They don't know they have dyslexia. They don't know what an IEP meeting is. And they've just been told their whole academic careers from their teachers, from their peers, maybe not directly, sometimes indirectly, just that you're not good enough. You're not good at academics. You can't do these things. And so we need to incorporate strengths for these students and students with other disabilities as well. But especially I was thinking about students with learning disabilities who often have those negative connotations deeply rooted in them. So this is an activity we developed. It's a worksheet that you can do with students. and it really helps them break down the different types of strengths that they have. Often when I go to IEP meetings and they talk about student strengths, it's very quick. It's just touch on this. So, Chris, he's always cracking jokes, and he's got a great sense of humor, and that's his strengths, and that's the end of the story. And then he has these million other deficits. I hate that. I think we need to have a more comprehensive look at student strengths. And so we developed this ARCS framework to look at students' well-rounded strengths. So strengths can come in 4 different categories, 4 different flavors. So the first type of strength is attributes. So these would be your inner strengths, your most important qualities and traits for life after school. So in the chat, I want all of you to think of a student that you work with or you've worked with in the past, and I want you to tell me one positive attribute that they possess. What is an inner strength that maybe one of your favorite or maybe one of your least favorite students has? What's something positive, a character trait, a personality trait, something on the inside that they possess? I want to learn a little bit about your students. So Christina, she has a helpful student. Perfect. Sense of humor. A respectful student. Outspoken. I love that. That's such a positive spin for some students who might be talking a lot in class. Resilient. That's a great one. Jonathan's a hard worker. I love that. Introspective. I love that. Social, honest, polite. Great. You want to come up with at least 3, and the student should be doing this worksheet, and they can come up with their own, or you can give this to the parent, and the parent can fill it out for the student. You can give it to the teacher, and they can fill it out for the student. And then you have a bunch of different perspectives on what this student's strengths are. Okay, so we've got attributes. That one's really common. The next one is less common. We also draw strengths from others. This would be our relationships, the R in ARCS. These are the most important people for life after school. I know for me, I had a coach, and that coach was one of the most important people in my life because he was outside my family. I could share things with him personally. He was a great motivator. He had connections in the community. And so I definitely I had strengths because I had access to his network and his support. So for the person that you typed an attribute in, who is the most important relationship in their life? Who do they draw strengths from? Do they have a best friend? Do they have a parent who is over the top supportive? Do they have a coach? And type it in here. And maybe try to think of 2. One could be the parent, maybe one could be someone else. The sister, track coach, mom, grandma, sibling, teacher. Sometimes teachers are our students' best supports. They don't have anyone at home. That happens. There's an assistant. Maybe they have a big brother, big sister, someone from their church, a neighbor. So this one's a little bit more tricky, but it's super important. And if you don't know who that student's strongest support is, you got to find out. Because that's the person that's going to help them in transition, right? That's the person that you need to get with because they're going to be with that student when they're 18, 20, 25 years old, after the supports from the school run out. All right, thanks everyone for participating and reflecting in the chat. I love it. Okay, another type of strength is your context. We draw strength from our community. These are the most important places for life after school. So for me, one really important context that I gained access to, I moved from rural Pennsylvania to Portland, Oregon when I was in high school, and moving to a city gave me so much access to so many new college opportunities, employment opportunities. I learned how to take the train. I learned how to navigate a city independently, so I gained a lot of confidence in that way. So your context is really important. So what place is really important for the student that you're thinking about, that that they can draw on strength for transition? Do they have access to a local college or library, or do they have access to a potential employment site? Do they always go to the comic book store because they're super interested in that? What places does this student have access to that might help them in the transition to adulthood? I see Tammy put dorm. Great. Library. Job center. I don't know. I love that answer. Some students are stuck, right? Maybe they're at home. They just don't have access to the community very well. It could be an online resource. Maybe they have a context online. Maybe it's their, what is it, Roblox or Minecraft. They have a community there that they can draw on support from, or maybe they, edit videos and that's their context, that's their space. So it could be real or it could be virtual. It could be the school, right? That's their place. It could be a certain classroom that they have access to. A group home, I love that. Church, that's a classic one. A cultural center in their community. Wonderful. Okay, the last one's an easier one. This is one that we think of all the time. This would be a skill. So this would be your outer strength, your most important skills and abilities for life after school. So for that student that you're thinking about, what skill do they have that is their biggest strength? One or two or three things that you think are really going to help them as they transition to college, employment, or daily independent adult living. What's that one skill that stands out? All right, Raquel, I love communication. Gina, computer skills. A people person, that's such an important skill, right? That's way more important than a lot of the skills we teach at school. 21st century skills, cool. Technology, social skills, that's so important for the workplace or in life. Able to use public transportation. Absolutely. So I absolutely know that our students have deficits. They have weaknesses. They have areas that they're not so good at. But by doing this type of activity and highlighting their strengths, they're really going to build trust with them. They're going to see transition in a positive way. Their parents are going to like doing it. And it's really going to boost the positivity of your IEP meeting by covering it at least a little bit. So I think this type of activity, we should all try to draw on, even if it's not this one. We want to incorporate these types of informal strengths-based assessments. This is an example of what it looks like. And at the very bottom, after a student fills it out, they can write a strength statement that maybe they can read and record themselves reading, like Belkis mentioned, before an interview. It can be their elevator pitch. I am positive, energetic, and kind. I draw strength from people like my parents, teammates, and counselor. I also draw strength from places like my library, local colleges, and the city of Portland. I am good at swimming, thinking critically, and writing. And they can use that in their job interviews, and it can be their mantra for incorporating, that positive self-esteem. So what about students who are very negative? And rightfully so. Maybe they've heard negative things about themselves their whole lives. What if they say, I don't know. I don't have any positive strengths. I don't have any skills. I'm not good at nothing. I go home, I have nothing. I have those students. I worked with a lot of those students. They don't have the responses. We need to help them draw it out. So we need to provide additional assessments to help them explore their strengths and make them realize, yes, you do have something you're good at. Yes, you do have, maybe you struggle at certain things, but people who could help you. So you have that relationship support. So I've included a bunch of links to online, free, informal strengths assessments that students can do and feel happy and start to explore and self-reflect. I even included a couple extra assessments as well. But one is that the T-Folio strengths. It identifies a student's top personal and work-based attributes. I think it's the college and career, I can't remember what CCC stands for, but they do a cool needs assessment on the most important attributes for college and career success. Relationships as well. There's a really cool activity called Circle of Friends, where students can learn about the different types of circles of supports, those intimate supports, those friendship supports, those professional supports, those societal supports that are around them. There's also a networking questionnaire that looks at students' ability to network and get in touch with different types of people to gain that support for transition. For context, there's a really good community mapping activity where students can learn about the community and what supports they have available to them that are, free or available or in walking distance, or you could take the bus to get them. And then a community summary log that students can keep track of the places that they go to and learn about what they like, what they dislike. They can use this when they do community-based experiences in school. And then for skills, there's a lot of really great tools as well. I include a link that's college readiness skills, where students can think about what skills they have that are really important for college. Because it's not just academics that helps you graduate college. You have to have other personal skills as well, and help-seeking skills in order to be successful in college. We all know that. And then Career One Stop has a really good skills assessment as well for career-related skills. And after you do the assessment, it'll tell you what types of jobs, what types of careers you might be drawn to. And it includes career-related skills and soft skills, because we know it's not just about, can you do this task, but also can you manage yourself in a workplace. So those links are in the resource document. And then lastly, we want to think, after we do these informal assessments, after we do these activities, after we boost the confidence in the student about their strengths, how can we incorporate their strengths into our present level statements, into the goals that we write, into the course of study that we develop, into the coordinated transition services we provide, and into meetings. We want to make sure all of these things incorporate strengths. We also incorporate deficits and we address our needs, but they also incorporate those strengths. So how are we making sure all of these things are strengths-based, not deficit-based? In the article that I include the PDF for, I provide some statements for transition plans. Like, how do you write a strengths-based present level statement? You start with strengths, then you go to deficits, then you talk about growth. And I provide some examples there. There's also goals as well, and how you connect strengths to a student's course of study. I'd be happy to talk about that more if you like. All right, I think we're doing okay on time. The last tool that I want to share is about gathering student feedback. Because if we don't gather student feedback, we're going to continue doing adult-centered activities rather than student-centered activities. And we're not going to gather students' opinions about how things are and what can improve them. So we want to gather student feedback in order to make improvements, right? We're human, we're not perfect. We want to continually improve our practice to make our transition services better year after year, student after student. So we want to listen to students. It also helps us be more individualized. It helps us empower students. I want to talk to you because you're the expert in the community-based experiences that we do. You're the expert in IEP meetings and how they make you feel. So I want to listen to you in order to improve my practice. It helps empower students, and it helps ensure that IEP meetings and transition planning is truly student-centered. I include the survey, the full survey that I'm going to show you is in the results, or is in the resources document. But the article that I'm writing with a colleague on this is still in development, but I can share that to Anne once that gets completed. All right, so as you're gathering student feedback on the IEP and transition planning process, you want to make sure you introduce it as a good thing, frame it positively, say something like, we want to hear from you. Your feedback is important and it can help us improve IEP meetings and transition planning for future students? Please answer the questions below honestly and thoughtfully. Students are going to get a kick out of this because they've never been asked their thoughts about teachers before. They've never been asked, how that IEP made them feel and how they can improve things. And a lot of students want to be leaders and make sure the students that are younger than them have a more positive experience. So again, the full feedback survey is in the resources link, but maybe this survey is something that you could give to all your students right after the IEP meeting as a way to gather feedback. Maybe the whole district can adopt something like this and give it to select students to make sure that you gather feedback from students. All right, so the first step in this student-centered process is we have to invite the student. So students can answer, were you invited to attend your most recent IEP meeting? Yes, no, not sure, don't remember. We want to make sure we give this type of survey quick after the meeting so that they do have it fresh in their minds. And then we also want to make sure IEP meetings are memorable and students are speaking in them and talking about them. And then they are going to remember it for more time. But if we make it this secret hidden thing that they just have to sit on the side, they're not going to remember and it's not going to be meaningful to them. And then we also want to gather feedback on how they were invited. Were they just told 5 minutes before, like, hey, I'm pulling you out of class, we're going to an IEP meeting? Were they told a month before? Were they just given a piece of paper to put in their backpack? Or did they have a conversation with someone about, hey, this is your IEP meeting and this is how you can participate? And then also we should ask them, were their parents or caregivers invited to attend the most recent IEP meeting and how were they invited? Again, we're valuing student feedback. So we want to ask them these types of questions to improve our practice. All right, it's not just about inviting students though. That doesn't make your IEP student-centered. They also need to attend. So we should ask them, did you attend your most recent IEP meeting? Yes, no. And then if yes, why did you attend? Just a couple words. What made you want to go? You'll be surprised what you hear from students. They want to make sure they're not taking anything I said out of context. I went there because it's my life. I want to be there. So you want to get those types of things. Or if no, why did you not attend? It's not about me. I always feel like I'm getting yelled at IEP meetings, so I don't want to show up to that. Or people are talking about me, and I don't like that. Or I don't like to hear that I'm in special ed, and I want to avoid that. Or I don't like people saying that I have a disability, and I disagree with that. But whatever it is, we want to learn from students why they're not attending, and then take steps to encourage them to attend and make IEP meetings more attractive to them. And then also, how did you feel during your most recent IEP meeting? If they selected yes, were you excited, nervous, comfortable, awkward, happy, sad, proud, or ashamed? What grade level were you in when you attended your first IEP meeting? Were you in elementary school, middle school, high school, or you don't remember? And then did your parent or caregiver attend? And then we want to get students' feedback because sometimes they provide the most honest feedback. A parent might lie to you and say, oh, I'm busy, or I couldn't, make it. And those could be true, absolutely. But it could be, the parent doesn't like them, or they don't like the people at the school, or they don't like showing up, or they don't like engaging with the translator, or there wasn't a translator in the past. And so why would they show up? It's a waste of time when this is poor. So the student will give you the real story. If yes, why do you think your parent attended? Or if no, why do you think your parent or caregiver did not attend? You'll get some interesting responses here. All right, the next one is participation, right? Because again, it's not just about attending, it's also about getting involved and making sure the meeting is about you and you're involved. So did you participate, talk, ask questions, listen during the IEP meeting? Yes, a lot, yes, a little, no, or not sure. And then again, why? Why did you participate? Why did you not participate? Gathering, that information. Maybe, students felt like all the language was really fancy and they, didn't know enough to participate. And then you can improve that in the future if you get that feedback. Or, everyone started talking and I'm kind of shy, so I didn't know when I could talk. But you want to get that information from students. And then think about, how did you participate? Did you just sign in and out? That's participation. It's not the most in-depth participation, but it counts. Did you just listen? Again, that's participation. That should be valued, rather than, they might have their earbud in. A lot of students do, or they might be texting and not listening. But did you listen? Because that shows that you cared and you were invested a little bit. Did you greet people? Did you talk about yourself, your year, your experience over the past year, your goals? Did you answer people questions? Or did you get really involved? Did you ask questions? And did you tell people your opinions? So we want to get students information about that. And then we also want students' feedback on how student-centered the IEP meeting was. So before the IEP meeting, did anyone teach you how you could participate? No. They just told me to show up at 2 p.m. and I showed up. No one told me what it was. I just think it's about my schedule for the year. I don't even know what an IEP is. Maybe it's about my schedule. Or yes, I had a class on how to do a student-led IEP. I learned about self-advocacy skills. We role played, and then I was ready. That would be a lot. Before the IEP meeting, did anyone teach you about self-advocacy, knowing your rights, standing up for yourself, being a leader? No, they just told me to show up at 2. Or yes, they told me what an IEP was, what a transition was, what it means to be the age of majority, what rights I have versus my parents, what a transition team was, what my disability was, what my accommodations are. 11, during the IEP meeting, did you feel as though everyone there knew you? An IEP meeting can't be student-centered if it's a bunch of strangers who don't know you. That's not a student-centered IEP. A student-centered IEP is people that the student knows and knows care about them. And so that's critical, that everyone in that meeting should know and should introduce themselves to that child as if they were, because they are, a real person who this meeting is all about. 12, during the IEP meeting, did you feel as though everyone there cared about you? If they don't care, it's not student-centered. If students feel like people are there and just, checking a box or don't have your best interest at heart, that's not student-centered. During the IEP meeting, did you feel as though everyone who was there really respected your family and culture? Again, it's not student-centered and family-centered unless they're listening to the family, they're respecting their beliefs and their culture and their traditions related to transition. That's not student-centered, that's school-centered. Just doing what the school wants to do, not actually doing what the student and family feel comfortable with. And then again, 14, open-ended, gathering students' input on IEP meetings. What should be done to improve them for students? And then what should be done to improve IEP meetings for your parents? You're going to get, really great, honest answers from students if you ask these questions. All right, the last one is more specific to transition. So before IEP meeting, did you talk to anyone about transition? And then making sure, a lot of students don't know what that means, but this means planning for life after school, like going to college, work, independent living. Yes, a lot, a little, no, or not sure. If yes, who are all the people that you talk to about transition? This will be illuminating. Oftentimes, sometimes it's just one person the week before the meeting, but when transition's done well, it's a whole team of supports talking to the student about transition. So my family, my peers, my teachers, my school counselor, my transition specialist, or others. I talk to my, person at church. I talk to someone in the community. I talk to vocational rehabilitation. I talk to my employer. I talk to my camp counselor. Before the IEP meeting, did you do any transition assessments, surveys, or questionnaires, like a career interest in survey? So students, is it yes, I did more than one? Yes, I did one. No, don't remember. We can, as students are doing this, it's good to have them do it independently, so we're not influencing them, but also we should be available if they're like, I don't remember if I did a transition assessment. And then you can be like, oh yeah, we did these ones that week. And they'll be like, oh yeah. So sometimes you can support students. But we also want to ask them, what did you learn from these transition assessments, surveys, or questionnaires? Did you just click on a bunch of boxes and get a score? Or Did you talk about the results of that? Did you implement that? Did you address things? Or were you just giving your teacher or transition specialist a score so that they could plug it in the IEP and no one's ever going to think about it again? How meaningful was it? And then during an IEP meeting, did you participate? And then what did you like about the meeting? And then what did you not like about the meeting? So 20 questions. I know it's a lot. But if you do this with some students or all students, you're really going to get good feedback to improve your meetings, to improve your transition process, and making sure that it's really, really meaningful to students. Thank you, Cruz. I'm glad I'm not just talking to the void of my empty office on a Saturday. I'm glad people are listening, and I'd love to hear your questions. And any, maybe you can go through the resources right now and click on them, make sure they work, and let me know if you have any questions about doing an interview, about doing strengths-based assessments, and then gathering student feedback. We have a few minutes left. I'd love to hear your feedback. I'd love to get your information. And then also, I put partnerships. I haven't told Anne this yet. I did tell Belkis. I am at the University of Texas at El Paso right now, but I'm actually moving. I got a job in Southern California starting next year. So I will be around. If anyone wants to do any projects together, do any research, have me come in and talk to you about doing transition interviews with students with behavioral challenges, students with learning disabilities, doing strengths-based assessments. I'm going to be in Ventura County at Cal State Channel Islands next year. So I would love to see your classrooms, see your transition process, and learn about the community from you. I can't wait to be there. I have family in California. I can't wait to come.
Oh, that's so exciting. I'm so happy for you. And yeah, I'm already trying to think. There was friends in our team that were texting me and side chatting me like, this guy is amazing. So maybe, just maybe, we could do something in person. So, oh, that's awesome. So thank you so much. I love your energy. I feel like you've got us all fired up about doing this. I love the strategies that you gave. And I even just like some of the small details that you mentioned were really cool. I was writing them down. Like, I love how you said, even just to have snacks available for students. And it's like, yeah, that's what kids are all about. So I can't decide if I would want Belkis to be my case carrier and you to be my transition teacher, or the other way around, or maybe both of you could do it. But I just feel like I can just feel your passion for the topic through the video. So thank you so much for sharing all of that and the resources. I'll put that resources organizer in the chat again. I know I keep dropping it in there, but people are always asking for it. So everything is in there. And any questions from anyone, go ahead and ask.
Oh, I love Brian's question.
The chat's like, moving so Brian, fast, I missed it.
That's so many of my students in high school with learning disabilities, with emotional and behavioral disabilities. They don't know they're in special ed. They don't feel comfortable with the label. They don't like special ed. They don't like the small classes. And there's no easy answer there other than treating them like an adult or a young adult, and having real conversations with them about life, because that's all transition is. Every single person goes through it, no matter if you have a disability or not. But it's hard, and it's hard to bring up these questions, and especially if parents don't want their kids to know, or all of those things. That's why it's so important that we all work together and just start these conversations earlier. We have to invite students to IEP meetings in elementary school. We have to have conversations with students about accommodations and what disability means and what it doesn't mean much earlier. But there's no one size fits all answer. We just got to start earlier. We got to do a better job of being open about disability and special education and removing that stigma away from it. Yeah, absolutely. Private meetings, having real conversation, bringing in the parents, making sure it's confidential, and you support them emotionally as they're going through this challenging experience. I interview college students. A lot of college students, like when they're 25 years old, they just realize they have ADHD and no one ever told them. And now they realize they can get medication or get accommodations at college. And they just wish people had talked to them as mature people much earlier rather than hide it from them and then thinking that something was wrong with them their whole life. So it's so important to have those conversations. And again, maybe bring in college students or adults to talk to these students who have the same disability, same experience, because that person will really understand them more than you can. I get too fast. Maybe you all will record this and put it at 0.75 speed. So I apologize for that.
It is recorded. No, I love that you're going to be local because this is something our district is just really starting to have conversations about. So our first presentation today was actually Nicole Douglas, who's in our district, and she and her team were tasked with leading the discussions about student participation in IEP meetings. So our district is really just kind of starting to explore what that looks like and what it looks like for different age ranges of students. And so as I mentioned earlier, when Nicole was speaking, the people on this call are primarily serving students who are in high school or above, so kind of grades 9 or above. But I think we're all on the same page. And even I think that there's a nationwide discussion about sort of changing the transition age down to 14. Our school district does utilize age 14 now to start the ITP, but also starting to include students even in the elementary years in these conversations so that they have the technical language isn't so foreign to them by the time that they get to high school, and so that they can advocate for themselves. So yeah, absolutely. Well, it looks
But
like
all the training in the world for transition specialists and teachers and student-centered planning isn't going to make it happen. You have to ask students and parents, what are the barriers and what would get them to do it? And how can we address that? You've got to get feedback from students and get them involved in making it happen.
Absolutely. But we have the right people on today's call to start engaging the students. And so that's what's awesome about doing these sessions, is that we've just been able to reach all of the people that attended today so that they can start having the conversations with those students and figuring out ways to embed the students in their IEP meetings, you know, in innovative ways that they haven't been included previously. So thank you on behalf of our team. A big thank you to you and to Belkis and to Nicole. Any closing words, Anne? We're at noon now, so in the interest of time.
No, that is it. Thank you to the three presenters, Nicole, Belkis, and Christopher, and for all of you for being here. And the participation in the chat was really great. And I know what it's like to be a presenter in a webinar and you're like, ooh, is the internet still working? Are people here? So thank you guys for participating, and to the presenters for engaging us in that way. That was really great. And we will be back April 15th for a Transition Institute all around employability skills for our students. So enjoy the rest of your weekend, everyone.
And thank you to Anne for putting this together. This does not just come together on a Saturday morning all by itself. It is a lot of work behind the scenes for Anne to make these thematically related, as well as all the other details. So thank you so much, Anne, for all of your work. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, everyone.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.